Hello, this is Christian Idealism. Today we are going to be having a discussion about the problem of evil. Now, just to kind of start off, I'm sorry if I haven't done any hangouts recently. I've been very busy, but now we're going to finally have a hangout after a few months. Um, Now, when it comes to the problem of evil, I will admit that I have not studied it like I have with other things. So I apologize to my viewers if I don't know as much into the topic, but I will try my best to understand um, the viewpoints related to it. Eric, I know on social media you have personally had this problem of how a good God is compatible with the existence of evil. And so, what's your take on this, given that this has been your issue?
Right. So basically, I just don't see, or well, it's been a few days since then, so I've heard different things from different people. So I have different thoughts on the matter now. But my issue then was the compatibility of a good God with the evil and suffering in the world. Um, I heard multiple theodicies on it. It just wasn't, they weren't doing it for me personally. Um, but I, again, my thoughts have changed on the matter. So that's sort of a brief overview of what I was struggling with.
Right, and I think in your case, it seems like it's more of a emotional problem,
Sure.
and I mean that's reasonable. I like how William Lane Craig puts it, where the problem of evil, he divides it into two problems, where you have the intellectual problem and then
Hmm.
the emotional problem, and it seems like the intellectual problem can be easily dealt with philosophy, and there's a lot of literature on this topic, but when it comes
Hmm.
to the emotional side, it's not so easy to kind of address it.
Yeah, and I would also try to steer people away from when they're going through emotional distress. Don't don't allow that to cloud your sense of reason. That's extremely hard to do, but yeah, steer clear of that because that's going to get you in a lot of trouble. Trust me.
Yeah, I mean, it just even for me personally, I've seen this. The problem of evil is not. I don't really see it as a philosophical problem. I see it as more of an emotional problem, because evil is bad, and that's how we evolved, or at least even if you don't believe in evolution, we can all agree that it's bad that bad things happen, and so that could affect us emotionally, so to speak.
Hmm.
So
Well,
and
yeah,
and
if I could say something here, I think it's very important, like Eric said, to be self-aware of of your own feelings on the matter while you're looking at it intellectually. Because for me personally, um, I could come across the best theodicy in the world sometimes that like is intellectually satisfies me. Like, oh, this is good. This sort of answers the problem, but it just doesn't seem to solve my problems in the moment. So I really need to bracket that off, and not think that because it doesn't satisfy me emotionally that it's not a good uh, intellectual response.
right, and I think there seems to be, I would say, a fundamental separation in how we connect the theodicy with our emotional problems with the when it relates to the problem of evil. And I could see why people, I could see why atheists like Christopher Hedges, he doesn't really attack the existence of God. I mean, he does, but like he seems to attack the idea. He seems to attack the idea that God is good because of the problem of evil. Um, so they're not necessarily attacking the existence of God, but they're more attacking God himself, because they think that he's evil and bad because there's evil and badness in the world. And, it just comes down to more of an emotional response, so to speak, and
Hmm.
not. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I'd just use myself as an example. Remember, all the theodicies that I was being hit with. by people, I remember my response was, like, yeah, that's good, right? That's a good response, but it's just not doing it for me personally. So you see, that's the emotional aspect coming into it. So even if I didn't have like a problem with, the logical aspect of things, again, the emotions were still clouding that sense of reason that's
Right, because
usually there.
humans are not really driven by logic. They're more driven by emotions, and
Yeah, you got to definitely learn how to have a happy medium, so to speak.
yeah. Um, it's kind of like reason is a slave to our what we want to believe, our passions, like how David Hume says.
Mhm.
Our reasons are always going to be slaves to our passions, and basically it's just that our emotions are always going to have a stronger effect on our beliefs than any evidence that can be given for their beliefs. And that's I think that that's the main reason why people believe things that are false, regardless of what that false belief is, regardless of what evidence. They just believe it because they have this emotional attachment to it, and not necessarily because the evidence supports it. Regardless of what, I mean, that could be for any belief. It doesn't matter. But yeah. So when it
Yeah.
comes,
So I have
go on.
so I have a thought. I guess I have two thoughts preliminary here. One is that I was just thinking that one could also personally think a theodicy is really bad, but for another person, that theodicy could really just be like, oh, that really applies to the suffering that that I'm thinking of. Um, I really think that there isn't a one size fits all approach to the evidential problem of evil for naturalism, where you actually are where you should be giving reasons that God might allow suffering.
Mhm. One of William Lane Craig's The Odyssey's there. So long as it's even possible that God might have morally sufficient reasons for allowing evil and suffering, that's I know that's more so dealing with like the logical aspect of this issue, and you're not going to see it that way again if you're allowing emotions to cloud your
Oh,
judgment.
that's a thunderstorm.
Yeah, whose side is that coming in from?
That was just a rumble of thunder. Sorry about that. I'll mute. Oh my goodness, that was so bad.
I thought that was another airplane, but yeah. So pretty much what Tim just said. And I'm
Yeah.
not sure if Kyle is still with us or not. Oh, there he is.
No, yeah, I'm sorry. I was seeing if anyone else wanted to join or hang out. Yeah, I mean, I haven't in my life. I mean, my life's been pretty good overall. I focus more on the intellectual side because that's where the arguments are. That's where the logic is. But I could see why, especially if someone's going through like like an emotional issue. Like for example, I'll give myself an example. Or I won't give myself an example. I'll give someone I know as an example. So my grandfather, when my grandmother had cancer, my grandfather was very upset and he literally cussed God out like many times. And he did this for many months while she was almost dying, so to speak. And so again, it comes down to the emotional side of how if God's allowing this bad thing to happen to someone, like getting cancer, we're gonna have a negative reaction, and so we're gonna think God is bad, and so that's how the emotions come in, and it affects people. And now, when it comes to actually solving that part of the problem of evil, there's a lot. I think it's much more complex to solve the emotional side because everyone is different. So everyone's gonna have different ways to deal with their emotions in that aspect. So I would agree with Tim here that when it comes to that part of the problem of evil, there is no one size fits all because everyone has different minds and different emotions. And so I think when it comes to that, I think the best you can do is just kind of help them out. And
Well, I think like cognitive behavior therapy is probably a better option for you in some situations.
right. Because when it comes to that, I mean, it's no longer a aspect of philosophy anymore. It's more of like a soft sciences approach, like psychology or sociology, where you have to help one person or a group of people to deal with their emotions on the problem as it relates to the problem of evil. So yeah, there is no, it's no longer philosophy at that point. It's just, how do you get someone to fix their emotional problems?
It's how to deal with your problems in life.
Right.
I think, for example, there are a number of good resources you can go to regarding this, whether it be spiritual counsel, whether it be just regular self-improvement types of things that can sort of distract you from the horrific parts of this world. There are a number of options for people who are really going through intense emotional issues that may manifest themselves in negative ways.
Right. Hello, Lucas.
What's going on? What's going on?
We're talking about
What the hell is that?
Oh, my profile picture. It's just a really cool picture of the Trinity I found, so I threw it on.
No, what the hell is your name? It's in Chinese or something?
What the heck?
Lucas
Hold on.
something. Yeah. Oh well.
Hold on.
Now, I have a question before we have Lucas speak here, but do you know if there's any books that deal with the problem of evil? I know there's a lot of them. I'm just kind of trying to get some recommendations here.
Yeah.
The Bible.
Oh, there we go. Shameless plug. Well, there's a number of things. Obviously, Alvin Plantinga's classic God, Freedom, and Evil would be the best in terms of the logical problem of evil, and he gives a theodicy there as well. Clay Jones has a relatively recent book on the problem of evil from a Christian perspective, where he gives a number of theodicies and explores skeptical theism and a number of other things. And then C.S. Lewis's The Problem of Pain has always been.
Oh, that one's classic. I love that. I read that. I freaking loved it. It was actually I was very impressed. Even though it's funny because he wasn't actually a philosopher, but he was able to like have a theodicy in such a way that would seem like he was a very philosophically intellectual, even though he was a layman, so to speak.
Right, there is no question that Lewis had a really good way of arguing in terms of connecting with the audience, making it very readable, and yet having a lot of intellectual depth to where many scholars today consider many of his ideas. I've been working through The Great Divorce as of recently, thinking about the problem of hell, which actually relates pretty closely to the problem of evil.
Right, and yeah, I'm actually glad you mentioned that. When it comes to hell, I just I have a very diverse view. I don't hold solid to any specific viewpoint. Generally, any viewpoint that says that hell is a separation from God in the sense that you create your own identity apart from God, I think that's that would be my hard stance on hell. As far as the details go, exactly what hell is like, I'm not really solid in any of those viewpoints. But
Well, even quite recently, I was a little bit more dogmatic on the issue than I am now. I held to an honor shame perspective of what hell is, and I would still hold to that to an extent. But in terms of whether or not hell is actually something that is something that you can't get out of, something that whether or not as C.S. Lewis says, the doors are locked from the
right.
inside.
I would totally agree with that it's locked from the inside. Go on.
And I don't think I would completely rule out postmortem evangelism, especially after reading Jerry Walls on the topic. I was really surprised by how good his work was.
Doesn't Jerry Walls actually? That's his whole field, isn't it? That and ethics, because I know he's written some books with Dave Baggett as well.
Yep. Yes, Lucas.
And he does hold to some. Well, he's basically just whatever. He's basically Lewis's view, I think, too.
Pretty close. I think he. Well, I don't think Lewis holds to any sort of universalism, but Wells has expressed some sympathy with universalist types.
And it's like the kind of quasi purgatory view too.
Yeah.
Purgatory. Well, yeah. When it comes to purgatory, I used to hold to a dogmatic stance that it doesn't actually exist, but I'm more open-minded to it now. I don't accept it, but I'm not as dogmatic as I used to be when it comes to purgatory.
What if we all went around and say what we thought the authentic teaching is on hell, both in terms of theology and philosophy? I think that would be quite helpful.
Yeah. I don't think it's smart to be dogmatic about any belief unless it's properly basic. But yeah, I don't think. I think there's a lot more room outside of the fundamentalist interpretation of hell. So yeah, I'm pretty open-minded to those views of hell, even though I don't think that purgatory is biblical. I'm not completely closed-minded to that point.
Right. So my basic position would be that hell is not a physical place. I think that the biblical data explicitly contradicts the idea that hell is a place, and that hell is definitely a state.
Yeah, a state of mind. I would agree with that.
And it is based on whether or not we are given God's honor or whether or not we live in shame of our own sin. But I guess what I do wrestle with at this point is whether or not that is something that that is final, whether or not when someone enters hell, they can choose to enter out of it.
Yeah, I don't. I used to take the dogmatic stance that no, once you go to hell, you can't get out. But I don't think that's necessarily the case.
I think the Greek does mention the word age in terms of eternality. Is the same sort of phrases used for Jonah in the belly of the fish. At least in Matthew, when Jesus talks about hell, that is, it is talking about an age. So I'm relatively, I feel relatively comfortable.
Do you think? Do you think that annihilationism would be a viable? I actually used to hold to annihilationism, but then I kind of went away from it once I learned about the honor shame aspect.
I think it's an orthodox position. I'm not going to kick you out of the kingdom, obviously, but I don't think it is intellectually a very viable option.
Yeah. No, I'm saying I used to hold to it. I don't hold to it now, but I just want to make that point clear.
Especially in the context of New Testament honor shame societies, I think the job the annihilationists are trying to do is done well by the honor shame people, because the idea that hell is some sort of extreme torture forever, physical torture,
No, that's no.
is so implausible, given the New Testament data and given that God is the greatest possible being. And the idea that our sins are going to cause us to suffer physical torment, something that is bodily, it's very implausible. Now, I think eternal torment in terms of emotional torment or mental torment is somewhat true, but I think it would be self-inflicted upon those who continue to resist God unto death.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to hell and like where people go, like what hell is, I think it's more of like I mean, maybe it's a metaphysical question. Like if thinking this, like I'll take my viewpoint when it comes. I don't hold any solid viewpoints on hell, but when it comes to what hell would kind of be at, I would say that from an idealist perspective, it would kind of be like your mind is separated and outside the the universe, but your mind kind of creates its own universe, but it creates a universe in which you're stuck in this fallen state for all eternity, and it would be that kind of like a self-inflicted nightmare, so to speak, depending on what exactly what your degree of the fallen state would be. Again, that's just coming from an idealist perspective, but I don't. Sorry, go ask. What was
I was
your
going to
question?
ask, would someone like say into your right, a Christian physicalist, and he holds to soul sleep, as far as I'm aware, wouldn't he pretty much have to hold to annihilationism? Since I mean, he doesn't believe in the immortal soul. And I haven't looked into all of this, of course, but
What does N.T. Wright say on hell? I can't think off the top of my head, but in terms of his views on soul sleep, I think the classic argument against soul sleep is effective, in that when David lost his child, it is definitely hinted at that there would be conscious that you would be conscious after death.
Yeah, and I think Jesus makes a good distinction between the soul and body. So I don't see. I mean, I don't
it's
know.
mainly that in Luke 12 and then 2 Corinthians
Yeah, because
5 or the
I know Jacob kind of when you had that conversation. I think it was like a month ago. I can't remember the exact date, but
yeah, I know what you mean.
he quoted. I don't remember what verse it was, but he quoted Jesus was saying how, be fearful. Don't be fearful of the one who can kill the body but not the soul, but be fearful of the one that can kill both body and soul. So I think I because of that and many other examples, I think there's good biblical arguments against soul sleep. So that's why I find it highly problematic. But whatever interpretation you have.
Paul clearly teaches that to be absent from the body is present with the Lord.
Yeah, right. So that's why I think soul sleep is. I don't rule it out as a possibility, but I think it's highly problematic. I don't think it's. I think there's good argument. I think there's better arguments against it than there are for it.
Yeah,
Right. I was surprised to see that like Hurtado holds to it, and I was completely surprised it didn't. Right when I first picked up his work as well.
though I think that he would put forth the best case, and N.T. Wright is definitely not an annihilationist. Looking up Jesus in the victory, there's from the way he's talking about how Jesus talks about hell, and if he was an annihilationist, he would have brought annihilationism up. He has critiqued Rob Bell, so he's not a universalist. I know he's critiqued Rob Bell on this specifically, actually. So I think he probably takes somewhat of a nuanced view, as N.T. Wright often does.
All right. Yeah. I don't know where Johanan is, but hopefully he joins because he's been dealing with problems. I told you before the hangout what I had to do to get him to calm down and not be so not dogmatic, but like have his emotional problems. So yeah. All right. Is there anything you guys want to add? I might have to stop this because I kind of run out of things to say.
Yeah. I think that the three most powerful, well, no, I don't know about powerful, but three of the most common arguments against Christianity would be the problem of evil, divine hiddenness, and the problem of hell. And I think all three of these are related. So the way you answer one of those could really affect the way you answer all three of them.
Right. I mean, because the problem of hell is sort of the problem of evil. How can an all-loving, omnipotent God send people to how could an all-loving God punish someone eternally for finite
right
sins?
And if universalism is true, then divine hiddenness ceases to become so big of a problem.
Right.
Because if we are awaiting eternal conscious torment, then I think that the response of divine hiddenness should be a lot stronger.
Yeah, I think
a very nuanced view of hell.
Yeah, I think it also comes down to like the salvation and kind of like if God's grand plan, so to speak, is to allow evil to bring about a greater good, how is this going to actually bring about greater good in the long run? And it also it might even tie into like what heaven is like and whether or not heaven is. I would agree it's a good thing, but like what exactly? How does that tie into like the degrees of heaven, so to speak? I would kind of take. I would agree with inspiring philosophy that heaven is not a place where you serve yourself. I think it's a place where you actually serve others. So it's not going to be like a place where you have parties all the time and you only serve yourself. It's going to be the opposite, where you serve others and where you're not selfish all the time. I think hell is actually a place where you just serve yourself and that's it. And then of course, doing that would cause you to the soul to literally destroy itself over time, depending on how long you're in hell for. But yeah, but I would agree when it comes to like universalism. If you take a universalist position, then the hiddenness argument disappears. The problem of evil is not as big as of an issue because everyone's saved at the end. But if everyone's not saved at the end, which we would all agree, I don't think anyone's here universalist, so we'd all agree that not everyone's saved, and so there are going to be people going to hell that are going to suffer. So it just depends on what exactly that suffering is. It's just a state of mind.
Yeah, and in terms of well, I guess I'll wait to say this. Wrapping it back around to the problem of evil, I think there's a definite difference between the. I think we have to make good distinctions between the different types of problems of evil, not emotional and evidential and stuff, but I'm talking more in terms of a probabilistic argument from pain and suffering in terms of like physical pain, and then an argument from animal suffering, and then a general probabilistic argument of all types of suffering. In terms of pain receptors and things like that, I think that idealism probably would offer the greatest way around this. Am I incorrect on that? That's what I'm thinking.
What was your? Sorry, was that a question you're asking?
Yeah, I think so.
Sorry, can you repeat?
Yeah. So one argument for naturalism is something like the idea that we have pain and pain receptors, and we experience a great deal of physical pain in our bodies.
And it's not all uh, Justin Schreiber, the main proponent of this, before he gave up philosophy of religion. It was and he adds on that not all pain or pleasure is biologically useful as well. So
Yeah, pain and
they would
pleasure.
argue, yeah.
Well, I mean, you gotta remember on idealism, it's not that we deny the body; it's just that we think that the body and the mind are the same
Right.
ontological substance. So,
Right, yeah.
whether or not we have actual pain receptors, I do think we do. It's just I don't think it's material ontology, like most people think. So,
Right.
yeah. Because I mean, again, when it comes to ontology, I mean, there is still a distinction, even on idealism, between physical pain and mental pain. It's just when it comes to the ontology itself, everything, of course, would be mental. It's just, I guess, there's a lot of category thing. There's category language we have to use to distinguish between physical pain and any mental pain we might be having when it comes to that. So. Yeah. Hold on. There was one apologist that I did like. He had a like really long like theodicies on the problem of evil. What was it called? I can't remember that one apologist. I can't get it on top of my head, but he was a friend of JP Holding. JP Holding actually is the one that got me.
Glenn Miller?
Yeah, him. What was his website called?
Christian Think Tank?
Yeah, Christian Think Tank. He had really good theodicies that really helped me when I was trying to get over my deconversion at the time.
Well, and Glenn Miller is is a very soft spoken individual, where he's not gonna sugarcoat it, and he's gonna relate to you in your sufferings, basically. And that kind sort of take he has on dealing with suffering, as someone who went through a lot of suffering, he can really help people like that.
Yeah, and I liked, like, one of the favorite ones I liked was his article on the natural problem of evil, which is, I mean, it does relate to the problem of evil, but it's more of like, it's not a moral problem, it's a natural problem. Why are there like natural disasters and so forth? I think he did a very good job of like pointing out, like, hey, you know, if you're gonna try to say that this natural thing is bad, then that means you have to say like all these other natural things are bad, even though some of these natural things that are bad might bring out some good in the long run because of the environment and the laws of nature and stuff like that. I think he did a really good job of pointing that out.
The only problem of evil that I think has any sort of intellectual weight would be gratuitous animal suffering. If one's view of some animals having a high degree of awareness.
Right, and it kind of, I think it does go back to philosophy of mind in that respect.
Right, so I think that plays an important role here.
Yeah, when it comes to animal suffering, I will admit I haven't really looked into it. C.S. Lewis did a chapter on that in his book, of how, you know, some people will take the dogmatic stance that animals don't have self-awareness, but I don't think that's the case, and I think there's good arguments that animals, not just good scientific arguments, but even biblical arguments, that animals do have some sort of self-awareness, even if they may not be rational like we are. Whether or not animals have suffering, I mean, again, I don't know. I mean, if you apply morality to only humans and not animals, then maybe you could somewhat get around that aspect of the problem of evil.
Well, I remain to this day, in terms of most animal suffering, I would still say that God has no right to protect animals in the same way that he doesn't care about animals in the same way that he cares about humans. Um, and I think that
Right.
alleviates some of the burden there. I don't know if Lucas has looked into it quite a bit, I think.
Right.
No, I haven't looked into animal suffering that much, though I do want Trent Doherty's book on it. That's and I've read C.S. Lewis a couple times, but I haven't looked into it like hardly at all,
Right, and
which
I
I
think
need to
that's
do.
on general animal suffering. But the only type of animal suffering that I think has any weight is like a bird that dies in a forest fire,
Oh, right.
like alone with no sort of human interaction that it would
Mhm.
ever have.
Yeah, and I mean, again, we happen to live in a world where animals do have to eat each other to survive.
Right.
So,
Yeah, Quentin
unfortunately,
Smith likes that one. That's
unfortunately, that's how, I wish it wasn't like that, but that's how the world, and depending on, why would, again, I guess it's more of a philosophical question of why God would allow a world where animals have to eat each other to survive. But why can't God create a world where animals only eat plants? But
Well, yeah. Well, I think there's a number. There's a number of things there.
yeah,
Um,
there's a lot
One
of
would be that God in that world, given the sort of butterfly effect of how things are, that God wouldn't be able to provide incarnation and atonement in such a world. Um, so one can still apply general theodicies like Felix Culpa to
right.
that, and that's the general theodicy that I would take. Um, eh, that Christianity offers the best answer to the problem of evil, in that incarnation and atonement are such a great good that any world with that is better than any world without incarnation and atonement.
Yeah, and not only that, but like when it comes to, like, for example, when it comes to God actually caring about humans, and not just humans, but like life in general, Christianity seems to be, I guess, the quote unquote best God in this, because God literally came down as a man and went through suffering. So it's not like he's just sitting on his throne, not caring, or it's saying that, oh yeah, it's, you got to deal with your problems, I'll deal with my problems. No, God cares, and he cares because he came down and suffered with us, and lived the life as a man and died for our sins. So God obviously knows what it's like to suffer and be human. And so yeah, I would agree with you that Christianity does provide the best answer in that respect. Um, and how God really does want to have a relationship with us. Because if you look at other religions, you don't have that. Like, you don't have a being that actually loves you. You just have a being like, oh, just if you do all these good works, then I'll grant you heaven. Like, that's it. Either that
You
or
don't have the same sort of redemption story that is
yeah,
so powerful in Christianity.
right. And I think that's the fundamental difference between Christianity and other religions is basically it's that other religions say that you have to save yourself, whereas Christianity says you can't save yourself. God loves you, and so He's going to save you instead. Um,
right.
so,
Well, I don't have anything else.
Johan is going to be here in about 15 minutes.
All right.
So, if you want to wait, go ahead. We can talk about something. Get off a little bit off topic, if you want. I know you guys have been busy lately, but you guys okay with waiting around 15 minutes for Johan to get here? Because he's been dealing with the same issues as Eric has.
Well, I definitely want to ask him about Christopher McHugh's theodicy.
Yeah, I haven't looked into that, actually. I'm going to ask him when he gets here. But
I actually watched Christopher McHugh's video on. He addressed the divine hiddenness argument in a very unique way, actually. I'll link it to you guys if you want. It's a lot to explain.
you can PMS. or you can just put it in the group chat if you want.
But I
Yeah.
know that it's very. I think it's very different from the sort of classical theodicies.
Yeah, and from what Johanna told me, many of the principles that McHugh uses, he can actually get from his idealism, his metaphysics. Yeah, I don't know how he does it, but that's from what Johanna told me. He was able to, I guess, derive a lot of the principles that McHugh used from idealism. You can ask him about it when he gets here, but that's what he told me in the past.
Yeah. So
Oh, Lucas, did you watch Eric? No, wait, not Eric, not Emperor Atheist video.
I watched 5 minutes and I just turned it off. I watched some of his resurrection videos when I was
he has videos on the resurrection. Oh, joy.
oh yeah, knockdown arguments, knockdown stuff.
I don't know. I mean, I do want to do a response to him, but I also don't want to do a response to him because I think it's gonna be a waste of time if we actually were to get together and do a response to his videos. So yeah, I don't know. Oh, Lucas.
Oh, pretty sure we lost Lucas.
Yeah. Well, probably got raptured out.
Well, we're screwed.
Behind again.
He's going to bed. That's what he.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll just wait for Johanan to get here. Hopefully he gets here. I don't know. But yeah, that was ridiculous. I mean, it's obviously cognitive dissonance he's having. Like, I don't see any other. He's obviously not trying to make any logical argument. I think it's ridiculous, but whatever.
Well, the guy is not. I really hate to say this, but he's not an articulate guy. He's just not the right sort of type to be doing this. Like
yeah, like Chocolate Hat had better arguments than him. And Chocolate, yeah, it's ridiculous. So
I did offer to debate him on the resurrection, but he's busy with his book right now.
Dude,
so.
I would love to see that debate because I think you would absolutely destroy him. Like, I don't think
that wouldn't really be much of a debate. Come on.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
That's unfair.
It's like
I would need quite a bit of.
That's like Goku going against Krillin. Like, you just can't
Stop. Oh no.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I really wouldn't recommend debating Tim on the resurrection.
From personal experience.
Not even the New Testament reliability.
What about grief hallucinations?
What about grief hallucinations?
I gotta ask, what is the best alternative to the resurrection, even though it might be ad hoc or not explained in the data?
Probably twin
theory.
Yeah.
Oh.
I
haven't. Okay, I'm gonna be honest here. I haven't started reading N.T. Wright's book on the resurrection yet. Once I finish.
By the way, I'm kidding about twin.
Twin.
I don't actually think they're the twins.
I was kind of like in my head. I'm like, wait a minute.
Well, I don't know. How would they even? Like, I'm just trying to think. Like that theory. Like, I don't see how that would even make any sense. Like,
well, I think like you could like.
I mean, where would you put the body? I mean,
well, no, it's like the body itself, though. Like, if he wasn't the resurrected Jesus, I mean, if he was, they would have to have the same wounds, right?
Right. Well,
I mean,
what Bill Craig said in his debate with Robert Kavanaugh on the subject was like, when Jesus showed the wounds to the risen Thomas, it must have been like ketchup or something, right? Like
The risen Thomas.
I mean, the what the hell? When you know,
That's heresy, man. You're out of here.
I mean, as new archaeological evidence is discovered, it just seems like these alternative theories just get more and more ad hoc over time.
Archaeology is going to be like the death of like anything, like any argument against like just the historicity of Christianity in general, honestly.
Yeah. I mean,
Like they're like praying right now that they just stop digging. Like
same thing with quantum mechanics. It's kind of freaking like.
wasn't it kind of weird how like materialists or like most of them seem to subscribe to some form of scientism, and
yeah.
it's totally backfiring on them.
Exactly. It's getting.
We only need science to,
It's getting
disprove
ridiculous.
God, and then it's like, well, actually, the deeper you guys seem to dig into physics, the more theists seem to be coming out on top there. My guy.
I know, like, and especially, I don't know, I don't know, Tim. I don't know if you're a theistic evolutionist. If you're not, that's fine. But IP's video on evolution that's gonna come out in June 1st, and yeah, I haven't watched the video yet. He hasn't sent me to it yet. I'm gonna watch it hopefully before it actually goes on YouTube. But yeah, that's boy, the atheists are gonna freaking go lose it with that.
Yeah, I seen his video. The death of materialism, the updated version of. I'm getting an echo. Okay, it's gone now. Oh no, it's not. Hello.
Were you saying?
Hello?
That was so weird. Yeah, I was getting a really bad echo, so like I couldn't hear myself.
Oh.
But yeah, I seen that video. That was the updated version of quantum physics debunks materialism, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I figured because there was a lot of like rehashing going on. I'm like, I'm experiencing like deja vu right now.
Yeah. I mean, it's getting ridiculous. I mean, I don't know. I mean, they've been going off the assumption of philosophical naturalism or materialism for like, I don't know, like 40 to 50 years now, but yet they still, it seems
Pretty
like
much since the Enlightenment, yeah.
So, but yet they're still like not able to solve, like, for example, the hard problem or any other problem with materialism. Like, it just seems like it's getting more and more ad hoc. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to sound, I mean, I may be acting a little biased here, but it's just, it seems like when they discover more of what reality is, it just seems like theism is just getting stronger and stronger, like with every new experiment that comes out.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I'll be right back.
all right.
Joined by then.
What to talk about? Oh, I know. Do you want to know like what like the death blow, like, okay, other than Christianity, but like what the death blow to atheism is that I like recently figured out?
What?
Pantheism.
Yeah, you're probably right. I mean, I don't know because well, the thing with that, I mean, when it comes to, I mean, there are some atheists that are also happen to be pantheists. So I mean,
Yeah, like they're naturalistic pantheists. Yeah.
yeah, I know a lot of those, and I'm pretty sure that if I ever did become an atheist, that's probably what I would hold to. So just
Yeah. There's been surprisingly, I did not know this was possible until recent, but there have been some atheist philosophers in the past who have actually subscribed to idealism. I'd have to get their names, but that was interesting. And
No,
then
there
there were
are
also
there's
sorry, go
rare,
ahead.
no there are rare forms of idealism that are compatible with atheism. But,
Mhm.
it's just again it's I think it's extremely ad hoc. But if they want to hold to it, then whatever.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that was just like a random thought I had. I'm like what like what are atheists doing against like pantheism? Because
Well, it's kind of
if,
I mean pantheism is kind of like in the middle.
yeah,
Like it's not really like
if you're gonna claim like everything, like the totality of nature itself is God, I mean,
yeah.
you
All right,
can't really dispute that.
Derek might join. Hold on, I'll private her. Johanan is gonna hopefully join in a minute, and then I'm gonna invite Derek to join as well.
Who?
Derek Vick.
Derek Vick, yeah,
Okay.
Oh.
He's the deist, right?
yeah. Maybe he might have a few thoughts on this, so I'll message him the.
Why not, right?
Deists are
Hold on.
very interesting people.
Well, especially Derek Vick. Derek Vick is
He's an eliminative materialist, which I find very odd, but
He's a what?
thoughtful
Eliminate-
fellow.
eliminative materialist.
Hmm.
If you watch one of Dean Espay's episodes, him and Johanna Ratz argue about it.
Gotcha.
Oh, I was gonna tell you, Kyle. I was watching a debate. I watched it through again between Jeffrey J. Lauder, who is a really well-spoken naturalist, and Kevin Vandergriff, who is a Christian apologist, and they had a debate a few years ago on Christian theism and naturalism. And Kevin Vandergriff actually used sort of a cosmological argument using quantum indeterminacy to support his contingency argument, basically, if I remember correctly.
What was the
He was
atheist
basically
response?
saying that due to the wave function collapse, that the ultimate foundation of the supreme foundation of reality has to be able to observe, basically the observer effect.
Hmm.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say that. Wait, I'm activating. That's from you, Tim.
Oh, okay. I'll mute myself.
Well, I mean, that kind of assumes that because what you need to understand is that collapse happens within space time, and if God is outside space time, then he can't cause collapse because collapse is within space or time. So if he's saying that everything has to be collapsed because God sees everything, that's not necessarily true because God's not in space observing everything. God is actually, I guess, so to speak, within our consciousness in the sense that he could perceive and experience the same thing that we are experiencing. So there's nothing for really God to experience other than what we experience.
No, that definitely was not it. I'm gonna pull up the statement right here. But it was very friendly to the objective idealist camp. I'll pull up the slide.
All right.
Hey, Mr. Brass. We're just waiting for John and Rats, and then we're gonna discuss. We're gonna go back to the original topic, which was the problem evil. But right now, we're actually discussing philosophy of mind. So,
Oh, all right. That's fine. I know a little bit about it. So, how's you guys' day been?
pretty well.
That's good.
Pretty tiring.
Yeah.
I can agree with you there, bro.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what topics like on the philosophy of mind were you getting into? Because it's a big, broad range of subjects.
Timothy was about to send me a screenshot, I think, of one of the arguments. I think it's either for or against objective idealism. I'm not sure, but he found it in a debate between an atheist and a Christian philosopher. So,
I mean, you guys, like, if you've seen my little, I would say it was more of a discussion with Johann Roth and stuff, my
Yeah,
position really only.
I was
But,
actually in that, but I didn't really talk much. But I was observing you guys kind of going back and forth on that. That was pretty good discussion you guys had. So
yeah, I like Johann Roth. He's my friend. I like him. Very smart guy.
all right, let's see.
I'm still reading into philosophy of mind. I really am into David Chalmers. I disagree with him on some things though, but in general, I do think he's a well-written author.
Yeah, I don't agree with him on his what's it called, property dualism, but he does pretty well at laying out the hard problem. So I'll give him
Well,
that.
yeah, he does. I mean, I do know a lot of arguments that go into the soul. I know plenty of those.
Yeah, but he would call himself a naturalistic dualist, where you could still hold to like materialism, but kind of like it's kind of like, I don't know, it's hard to explain, where you have like the mind is like a property of the brain, but yet it's
Well,
not. It's like the mind is like an irreducible mental property, but it's not an actual entity like what it would be like in substance dualism. So I don't think.
well,
Yeah, he
with
doesn't. Sorry, go on.
like with Thomas Nagel, I know him as he's a property dualist, and he just like property dualists generally believe that there are immaterial aspects of the brain, but they all are generated by the brain. So there would be immaterial like it would just simply the immaterial would simply be a function of the brain.
Well, I mean, I don't know if that would be. I mean, it might be property dualism, but that would seem like a more functionalism where,
Well, I mean, I do. I'm just giving the layman
Yeah,
terminology.
yeah,
If I mean, to really go over property dualism would take, people do whole lectures on this.
yeah.
So I mean, I'm just giving like a little, just a layman's definition of it. Now, of course, people have different opinions, like how would it work out and stuff. A good argument, I would say, for the soul would be the intentionality argument.
Oh yeah, that's a really
That's
yeah.
the Swinburnian thing that yeah, I've been pretty taken by most of his arguments for the soul.
Well, generally I have a more interpretist like perspective when it comes to intentionality. But I do find the arguments fascinating on all sides.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, there are. I don't. I mean, the arguments for materialism. I don't. I mean, a lot of it is just, in my opinion, question begging. But I don't know. Maybe from if you were to take like some different like starting point, maybe you could argue for materialism. But I don't know.
I think it all depends on your presupposition.
Yeah, because it just seems like the whole like physical realism itself is just a big question begging. Like it's literally, you have to question beg physical realism in order to actually, or material ontology in order to actually justify materialism in the first place. So before you can even before you can even begin to talk about any position that has some sort of material ontology, you have to question big material ontology. So I just I don't. That's why I see. That's why many of the arguments for physicalism are I just see them as question begging. So.
You know, another argument that I always find that's pretty good for the soul would be what I'm trying to think of how the identity argument, like, you know, the identity parts argument.
Yeah, I
It's
think
to
it.
show how
I
it's
think
to
I'm
show how you know how the soul is like how mental properties are different than physical properties.
right.
Are you talking about like if you split the brain and replace
Oh no,
portions
it's
of
like,
it?
well, I mean, it's like this, like, um, if you were to separate a chair into multiple parts, you were to rearrange it or give it over time, it would no longer be a chair anymore. It would be something else. But we know for a fact that after a couple years, all the cells in your body are, you know, die off and they're replaced by new cells. So logically speaking, you should be a completely different person,
Mm-hmm.
but you still remain an identity. Like, you know, on a physicalist level, you're not the same person you were when you were born. All the cells of that person has been replaced.
Right,
Or
because
if you were
all of our atoms have changed completely, but you're still
so, you know, but you still remain the identity of that being. Um, it is very interesting. Also, one also can go into how our brain seems to have, you know, the idea of universal concepts. You
right.
know, we can think about universal concepts when we know that like, you know, other things do not. They have at best they have like you know, spacious, like, you know, they're confined thoughts. They don't have like the universality of their thoughts.
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
very
and
interesting.
oh yeah, and I think one of the really biggest arguments for at least the mind being irreducible is I think the qualia, because like for example, if you look at the color red, like that color red that you're looking at is you can't reduce the color red to a bunch of neurons, which shows that the color red is subjective and not objective like a neuron. So that creates the subjective slash objective gap, so to speak. Um, and
Yeah,
I know there are arguments against qualia, but I think I don't know. I mean, the biggest problem I see with many of the responses to qualia is that consciousness itself, like for example, one of the biggest arguments is that qualia is just what we use for language. Like the color red is just a language term, or the color green or the color yellow is just, you know, it's just language and that's it. Well, the problem with that argument is that language itself is qualia. So you can't really say that qualia is language, because it's actually the qualia is what gives it the language, not the other way around. That's why I don't find the arguments by, like for example, Daniel Dennett convincing, because they just they don't actually refute the qualia problem in
well,
materialism.
Bennett doesn't, you know, this is like sort of a straw man. Like people say that he denies conscious experience. No, he doesn't deny conscious experience. He grants that, but he denies is like, you know, that consciousness really isn't like that important.
I don't. I haven't read his book, but from what I know and from what I've heard from people that have read his book, he holds to the multiple drafts model, and
Yeah.
I think I find it, because I think consciousness is properly basic. So for him to say that, oh, consciousness is like this user illusion, so to speak, I can't, epistemologically speaking, seems self-refuting.
Just think about it like sort of like this way. It's sort of like your phone. We generally think, when you're looking at your typing on your phone, you have this sense of control with your phone. But and you think that you have all this amazing control on your phone, but in reality, you're only contributing to a very small part, of what your phone is actually doing. Like the screen and everything, is sort of just there, but the mechanical processes that are going into that are vastly more complex than you're aware of.
Right, but I mean that would seem like an argument against because if consciousness is just a byproduct of the brain, I mean, don't you think consciousness would be able to like at least go down to that level of information processing? We'll be able to actually experience all of the things that are going on in our brain. So I mean, I just find that as an argument against physicalism or materialism. But I mean, we could argue all night about that aspect, but
Well, I mean, if you want my personal opinion on it, I think, when we see in like an after image that has a red stripe on it, there is no red anywhere in the universe, nor in the brain, or I would say even in the mind. What we have is the experience of a red stripe. But we shouldn't insist that anything but a physically instantaneous representation episode of the brain accounts for that experience. Basically, what I'm saying is the experience of the color world is basically a systematic error where it takes in our visual experiences and projects them onto the world. We think that they exist out there in reality when they're just subjective responses to an achromatic reality.
right. But I mean, the problem with that is then you would have to say that perceptions are just a user-face illusion, which if that's the case, then why should I trust any of my perceptions? And if I can't trust my perceptions, then why should I trust science and why should I trust rationality or anything like that? That's why I say that experience and consciousness have to be properly basic. Because if it's not, then we can't have any knowledge of anything. You're basically like stuck in like, I wouldn't say solipsism, but kind of like you're stuck in your own mind. You can't actually learn about the outside world if you were to take that view. So I mean, again, I understand it's your personal opinion. I'm just trying to point out. I'm just trying to point out my main problems with
I feel
that position. So
I
again, I'm
feel
not.
you.
Yeah. So that's all I got to say about that.
Yeah, I know. I think, when it comes to solipsism, idealism doesn't necessarily debunk it. It could very, like when, you say that consciousness is fundamental, or, the mind, has, I can't, it depends on what kind of idealist you are, or different kinds of it. But, I wouldn't say, that forms of idealism, sometimes presuppose solipsism
Yeah.
to an extent.
I mean, I would somewhat agree with that. Johan and Rat's going to be here hopefully within. I just talked on the phone with him a minute ago, and he said he'll be home in around 10 minutes. So hopefully he'll be here within 8 minutes, but we'll see. I know Mr. Barras, you're a materialist, so I just have a question for you. What did you think about IP's video, most recent video?
Debunking, his the death of materialism.
Yeah, what would be your kind of response to that, given that you're a materialist yourself?
Hey,
Well,
not to interrupt or anything, guys. Kyle, I'm gonna leave the hangout really quick and then rejoin again in like 2 seconds. So I'll ask you for the link again.
Okay.
Well, generally, what I tend to go for is I go for the more I'm not really much of a science guy. I am trying to break that. I want to learn more about science so I can better with my philosophy. But like generally, what I hold to is like I know IP also did a video showing his problems with it, but I generally take the I'm trying to think what's the word the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics.
Okay. I mean, okay, that's good. Now, I would agree with you that I mean, okay, the many worlds interpretation is the best materialist interpretation. Now, there are idealist ways you could actually hold to the many worlds, but I would agree with you that that is the best interpretation for a materialist to hold to. I think all the others, like Bohemian Mechanics and the
Oh
GRW
yeah,
things, I think those are ridiculously ad hoc. So
yeah.
I would agree with you. Yeah. So the many worlds is the best materialist interpretation.
Hmm.
But again, there are some problems with it. But if you hold to that, that's fine, I guess.
I mean, generally, like from my um, I believe that Copenhagen is the most popular view taken by scientists these days.
Well, it is. But the thing with what you need to understand is that Copenhagen is a pragmatic interpretation. It doesn't. It doesn't. They try to ignore the philosophical implications of it by either they say that the quantum world and the macro world are separate. So they say for all practical purposes, there is no consciousness that is needed to cause a collapse because everything at the macro level is ultimately observed. But that's only for practical purposes. That's why it's called a pragmatic interpretation because it tries it just focuses on the practical side of it of quantum mechanics and not the philosophical side. So, but yeah, you're
Yeah,
right. The Copenhagen is the most popular interpretation that most
I,
physicists hold to.
I try to keep up with some of the science work, but like Johann Roswell, you'll know that I tell him like when he goes into like some of the quantum mechanics and stuff, I sort of just check out because that's not really my field.
Right,
But I am trying to learn more about science in order to better help my philosophy.
right, right. That's
Um,
understandable.
mhm. But I definitely would not, call myself like an authority on the matter.
Right, I wouldn't call myself an authority either. So um,
So I mean,
the best we can
I can
do
say,
at our
mhm,
level is just understand the science from a layman's perspective because the
yeah.
mathematics is obviously ridiculously hard that we wouldn't be able
I
that I
know.
don't think.
I tried reading a paper on it with the mathematics.
Yeah.
I I feel like I had a stroke.
Yeah, so
Seeing all those numbers, I don't know how they do it.
yeah.
The only thing that's giving me a worser headache is trying to do Bayesian probability.
Oh, you should ask Tim about that. tim is
Yeah,
Hello.
uh Tim
Hey,
is
can you guys hear me?
yeah, we can hear
Okay.
you, Eric. But yeah, Tim actually does our does the boat, what's it called? I freaking forgot the name.
Um, Base serum? Yeah,
Yeah, base. Yeah.
I took I took it upon myself to learn it quite well, and I did. But
that's
and it's coming from someone who hates math. I hate anything. I mean, in high school, I took I went to calculus, but after that, I was. But yeah,
I don't
I took it upon myself to learn it.
I don't hate like I don't hate math in general. I mean, I'm pretty good at algebra, but you know, I only get so far.
Right,
Um,
everyone I guess has their limits there.
well, like when you get like I'm pretty, I always pass, things like algebra with flying colors, but once you get me into geometry or the more complex versions like you'd see with quantum mechanics and stuff like that, yeah, I check out.
The more abstract it gets, the more problems I have, I guess.
Yeah. Uh, I've read, some papers on neuroscience. That's how I get to a lot of my positions. Um, because that's initially how I began my studying.
Mm.
Is I simply, I read into near-death experiences. Um, I read into, like the whole, like they stimulate the brain.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah.
read, I read into some of those papers. Um, and that's generally how I've come to my that's just initially how I got into everything. It'd be nice to talk to Johan. I don't know what's the correct way of saying his name. I always say Johanan, but is it like Johan or Johan?
I don't even
I
know.
always pronounce it as Johanan.
Yeah, he's gonna be here in a few minutes. By the way, he just texted me, so just be
We'll
prepared.
ask him.
Tim, did you have that thing you want to show me, or were you not able to get it up?
I'll get it up later.
Okay, maybe here, get it up. Get it up when Johan is here, because I think I just want to see what he thinks about it. But
Yeah, I'm gonna pull up. I guess I'll get the PDF up here.
okay, but once he gets here, we're gonna have to change the subject back to the original subject. I might actually have to change the title of this hangout now.
Just you could just change it to something like just a general discussion on stuff.
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
Yeah, you won't mind if I upload this on my channel too, right?
I don't care.
I'll
Go ahead.
I'll link it in the I'll of course cite it.
All right.
Do you know of JJC Smart?
JJ, honestly, I don't think I recall.
Well, he's like, he's one of the people I go to when I'm coming into like my perspective. He's very well informed on these topics. Um, I was reading some of David Chalmers' book, and he cites him. He's a physicalist. Um, he's like a materialist, so I take some of what I go off of from him. Pretty smart guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's most philosophers of mind are unfortunately materialists, but whatever.
Well, here's what's funny. Funny enough, I don't get a lot. Most philosophers don't hold to the A theory or B theory of time.
Yeah, that's true. Most of them are in the middle.
Yeah, so I always found that fun because people in like the public just think there's just these two mutually exclusive options for time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It drives me nuts when people.
Like most people, I mean, most philosophers are compatibilists, so they take the middle position. So again, that's another example of so.
So people will say like there's only two versions of time that's really out there: the A theory or the B theory. When
No, it's not.
yeah,
I haven't looked into
some
theory.
philosophers altogether reject them both.
Yeah, I haven't looked into philosophy of time as much. I still hold the B theory, but I've recently rejected the block time version of it.
Woohoo!
I'm not as well informed on that as I would.
Well, my view, I mean, okay, I'll just lay my view out just briefly. My view is that I do hold the B theory, but not the block time. So I don't think that there's like this whole block from the Big Bang all the way to the death of the universe. What I do is I accept B theory, but I reject objective space time, which as an idealist, that's a consequence of my idealism. So
I'm a B theorist myself.
Yeah, but given that you're a materialist, you would kind of have to hold to block time because you would have to have objective space time. But my view is that I don't accept the objective space time, so there's no real things going on within the universe because there really is no objective physical universe. It's just a mind, so to speak. Which
Yeah,
I guess
Kyle, Vlad, and Musa had quite a long back and forth on the
yeah.
on the block theory and the one argument.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that
3
yeah.
weeks of
Well,
a
actually,
war.
that's a really. I mean, now that I think about it, I mean, that's a pretty good argument against block time. I wouldn't say it's a good argument against speed theory, but it's a good argument
Well,
against
no,
block time.
it's designed to argue against a block time
Yeah. So,
model.
yeah, I like.
Have you ever heard of Avicenna?
How do you spell?
AVIC.
Oh yeah.
You know, he's he's like an ancient scholar that you could argue for a finite universe on the B theory, like finite time on of the universe, because generally from theists, like from people like William Lane Craig and so forth, they reject the B theory because they believe it implies that the universe is eternal.
Which that's not necessarily the case. So,
well, I mean, some B theorists do hold to the finite time of the universe by simply like making it like X begins to exist at T.
right.
If
And then
X
you have,
exists at T,
mhm.
and there's no moment earlier than T at which X exists.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of theistic philosophers have done against, like, for example, Sean Carroll tries to argue for an eternal universe using block time, but once you bring that into the aspect, then you don't even have to bring in B theory into an eternal universe. So, yeah.
Well, Avicenna, when a lot of people like philosophical arguments against the finite period of time because it adds more of an emphasis. And Avicenna was not against a past eternal, but what he simply said was like if an infinity existed, it could only exist under certain conditions.
Right.
I prefer C theory of time myself.
C theory? What the heck is C theory?
C theory is the C in C theory actually stands for that one time Christ rose from the dead.
The C theory. What the heck?
Oh yeah, C theory for the win. And this is where we take this crap off of YouTube.
Avicenna, his argument was actually it's actually called the actually infinite, essentially ordered quantity argument. Basically, it goes like this. Quantities that are both whole and essentially ordered cannot exist as actually infinite. On the B series, time meets Avicenna's wholeness and ordering conditions. Therefore, on the B series, time is not actually infinite.
Yeah.
You know what is infinite though?
Well,
the logos.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Like what they put is like this: is like he held to that, that an infinite series can't traverse a finite, like an infinite series can't traverse a finite amount of time. Basically, that given an infinite amount of time, an infinite amount of moments can be traversed.
Well, it looks like we just disproved the eternal universe.
Well, I mean, it's just, like if you're arguing for B theory, but you still want to be like, hold up the
universe eternal. Yeah, that makes sense.
So we're all in agreement that the logos is infinite, right?
Uh-huh.
Well, I'm a deist, so.
Okay, that's cool.
I feel like the left out guy.
I'm gonna call Johanan again. This is getting ridiculous.
This is absolutely yes.
Derek, you're a deist.
Yes.
Mm. What's your take on the resurrection?
I think it's better attested than a lot of other miracle claims that we have out there. I'll
Oh,
grant
thanks.
that.
Awesome.
You know, it's certainly better than, let's say, the Buddha.
That's true. So historically speaking, do you think there's a case to be made?
I mean, you can make a better case for it than the others, but I mean, obviously, I don't agree with it.
Hmm. So your main qualm with it would probably be because it's miraculous in nature.
It's not really just that. I mean, I also have somewhat of a historical take on it too.
Mhm.
Generally, like, you know, I have a different view of Christ in general than a lot of Christians would accept.
Mhm.
So I mean,
Is
it
the
makes
view
like,
based in the New Testament?
oh yes,
I'd like to hear it.
you know, I've read some Bart Ehrman. I've tried to get into more biblical scholars, you know, because I want to really learn more about the New Testament, and I
Mhm.
want to further my exploration. Because what's funny is like I call myself a deist Christian apologist because I generally defend Christianity even though I'm a deist.
Hmm.
Well, right. From what I've seen, you're sort of a cultural. Um, I don't know if cultural is the right word, but um,
Yeah, I'm a
I see what
cultural.
you're saying. Yeah, I can see what you're saying.
Well, here's how my thing is like I disagree with Christians on a lot, but I disagree with atheists a lot more.
Hmm.
So I choose the lesser of two evils and I defend Christianity.
I think IP actually has a video on that. It's called "Is Christianity Evil?" I'll check it out.
Oh yeah, I did check it out. I love IP. Me and him actually had a battle on Facebook
Oh.
one time, like in Messenger. Like, you know, not like a battle, but we had a very big discussion.
What was the topic, if you remember?
Oh, the Virgin Mary.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
You know,
What
because
about her?
well, I mean, I was disputing the historicity of the virgin birth.
Mm.
Mhm.
Well, you know, IP was, you know, he was obviously, you know, going to attest that, you know, it is historic.
Mhm.
Well,
What were some of your arguments against?
I say it was a later development in the Gospels. You know, like generally we only have two claims of the like two Gospels that actually talk about it, and they're not even the first Gospels. Like Paul doesn't mention it, and Mark doesn't mention it, and John doesn't mention it, and John came last when you date it.
Right. I think the problem, I think that with your arguments there would be, I guess, a crucial assumption on the idea that gospel writers were inventing things.
Well, I mean, here's the thing also about it. Like, we know Matthew was more of a prophecy guy. You know, a lot of the miracles and a lot of the prophecies that are laid out was in Matthew. Um,
Right. In terms of why the other gospels wouldn't mention it, it doesn't really fall into Mark's sandwiching um, compositional technique. And I mean, with regards to John, I think in terms of John 1 and 2, while you don't have the specific story of Mary and Joseph and the baby or whatever, you definitely have a very incarnational approach.
well, you know, unlike, you know, a lot of Muslims and some Christian scholars, or I mean, not Christian scholars, but atheist scholars, I do actually hold that the gospel writers did think Jesus was divine.
Mm.
I just think that they thought they each had a different way that they thought he was divine.
Well, that's definitely more nuanced. I can definitely respect that a lot more than the fully legendary sort of view of things, because I don't think that you can get a really good idea of what early Christianity was really like without a very high Christology at the beginning.
Well, I think that they thought he was divine in the sense that like they thought he was a prophet that was like divined by God.
Mm.
Like
Well, I
that,
think
you
that
know,
even
like,
in Mark, you have some pretty. So, Jesus is both making some pretty high claims, in terms of being able to forgive sins, and like the Son of Man sayings and all the general arguments like that. But you've also got throughout Mark, pretty high references to and allusions to pre-existence that I think are important to note. And of course, you've got like the early Christian formulas like Romans 14 and Philippians 2.
you know, I do a typical argument that is made by scholars is like, you know, they'll say that like they'll use on Mark, you know, where it says Jesus was worshipped by his followers, but they fail to understand is also that, oh, hi, Johanan.
Can you hear me, guys? I got a new mic.
Whoa, that was loud.
That's fine.
Okay, just making sure.
That's actually a lot better in terms of quality.
Yeah.
Oh, this is even better than my other mic, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm gonna have to use this to make videos, though.
Yep.
I actually do plan on in the future challenging, you know, JMB apologetics to a debate on the historicity of the virgin birth.
So, what was his name? The guy we were arguing with Kyle on.
Who was it? Tim? Not you. Tim,
No, the other
another
guy,
Tim.
the new guy. There's a new guy now.
Matthew. I forgot his. It's Matthew.
Dickow. What the heck is up? Where are all these Bohemians coming from? They're like zombies.
No, they are.
I mean, you shoot one and more. There's like 10 more coming. They all keep spewing the same exact stuff. Okay, like
Yeah.
and it's all the same refuted stuff over again, and it's also the same epistemology. Like they question beg realism, physical realism.
Yeah.
And they do it in the same way. They say it's all warranted and all this, and then they come out with, it just like straight up. Then they have like they go into retardo land with relativity. Like I don't think if any of them would realize, if they went into academia, like regular physics department, talking about trying to promote Lorentzian relativity or Bohmian mechanics, they'd be laughed out on their ear.
Oh yeah.
I mean, they would be laughed out on their ear. This is not respected in academia. This stuff.
Well, isn't King Crocoduck a Bohemian proponent?
Which is ridiculous. I know.
Yeah.
And now you could say yes, maybe idealism is it's more respected in academia. I mean, we have people like Bernardo Kastrup and so on, and Donald Hoffman. But at the same time, the idealist approach doesn't need any new physics. It's just all you do is you take away the instrumentalism and you put a metaphysics onto quantum mechanics that you would normally put on if you were to treat it as more than instrumentals.
Yeah, and not only that, but they're obvious. They can't be defending substance dualism, because the orthodox interpretation is compatible with substance dualism. So I don't see what their whole motivation behind this Bohemian mechanics stuff is. I mean, there literally is no reason to.
But they don't want consciousness involved in it somehow. They say
but
the observer effect.
Why? I mean, there's
physicalism in the Bible.
I mean,
Can you give me enough time?
what I don't understand, like, if they don't want consciousness involved, okay, but they're still substance dualists. So at some point, you still have to have consciousness involved some way, shape, or form, especially when it comes to like the interaction between mind and brain.
Well, they probably don't want the interaction explained. They probably want it to be magic. Now, what's funny here, I want to look at, they constantly keep citing Tim Maudlin, right?
Yeah.
It's like some like great,
Yeah.
like, no, he's like, I mean, I look at this, I mean, he's a philosopher of physics, not physics, and that's, that's an okay thing, but what they're doing is they're trying to shoehorn in something that doesn't have a basis in anything, right?
Right.
Like, they're just question begging their own metaphysics without any justification for it, and they shoehorn it into quantum mechanics when it simply doesn't fit.
Oh, I was wondering, Johann, because we actually got into this discussion, but would you say
Mhm.
that the B theory of the universe, implies like, that the universe is, eternally old?
I wouldn't say eternally old, but eternal in a different sense, in a timeless sense. Like it's just there. It's just the whole thing's just frozen there. The whole timeline is just frozen out as though it's already it's a big film strip.
Like how Sean Carroll says it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's not the only one who would say it.
Now, would you hold
Brian
to,
Greene would say it too. Michio Kaku would say it, etc.
Would you hold the block time?
Yeah, that's just physics. That's the thing about this. The other thing that bugs me about this whole.
Sure about, I mean, I would kind of because
they argue as though B theory is not only. They argue like B theory is ridiculous, right? They argue that A theory not only is A theory like on the table, they think B theory is ridiculous. I'm like, no, you got it all backwards. If you go to a physics department and you talk about this, they'll just say, why is this even a philosophy question? This is settled by Einstein back in 100 years ago.
I know, but let me just clarify something. I would agree with you that B theory is correct, but I would question whether or not block time is correct.
Well, block time is B theory. I mean, when you deal with relativity of simultaneity,
not if you put in objective space time, sure, but once you throw out objective space time, it seems like block time would kind of disappear. Alan has pointed this out to me before, and I would agree with him that
maybe. Well, so the problem with this is when you get to relativity, they have something called the relativity of simultaneity, right? Which shows that like there are two events, right? And in person one's frame, A happens and then B happens, right?
Right.
But in person B's frame, A and B happen at the same time.
Yeah.
See the problem here?
Mm-hmm.
So because of this relativity of simultaneity, like whether or not two things are simultaneous, in one frame, one's in the future. Another frame, they're both at the same time in now. So it's like the future is already in other frame. The future of the other guy has already happened, which is the same thing you would have with block theory. Like the future has already happened.
Well, I know you would have the same thing, but like,
actually, there is a way to demonstrate this. There is one reference frame in which everything has already happened.
Right.
You know what reference frame that is?
The absolute, well, no, not the absolute reference frame.
No, actually, it's a whole bunch of reference frames.
Right.
Near infinite, not near infinite, but there's a lot of these things in the universe, and in any one of these things reference frame. And when I mean a lot, I mean like trillions to the trillionth power type of thing, right?
Right.
And in this frame of reference, everything has already happened. Can you guess what it is?
Okay, I see where you're going. Photorealism?
No, nothing related to that.
I'm clueless.
Photons.
I think.
How fast do photons move?
I was going to say photons. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Photons move at the speed of light, don't they?
Yeah.
Step your game up, Kyle.
Hold on, I'll be right back.
Yeah, look at this here. This makes sense. What we should do is bring Tim Maudlin on, okay, and ask him about why he thinks atheism is correct. Ask him what he thinks about substance dualism, and if mechanics would help to rule that out by getting rid of any interaction problem.
Yeah,
and,
I thought that's what you're good. I thought that's what you're gonna bring up as soon as you brought up Tim Maudlin, because that would be fantastic. They would just right away.
And then ask them what the only way that you think that theism would be plausible if there is an ontology change. A fundamental shift in ontology.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Which brings them right in.
I don't think any of these. I know, because I mean they're arguing this crap because I mean literally all they're doing is parroting to William Lane Craig. And William Lane Craig, I mean, he's a great guy in philosophy of religion, but even Moreland has told me, in class, like he's great here, but the problem is that he doesn't study. He hasn't studied metaphysics, and not having studied metaphysics, it leaves him in this whole other he doesn't understand some of what needs to be for there to be a God, right?
Right.
Now, of course,
He
you know,
also-
Moreland is a dualist, mind you, but he's also very open to idealism. And he said, even before meeting me, he said that idealism is very plausible. Like it may actually be true. Like he says that, like it's not, he's actually when I say this, he's not like rejected. He's actually agnostic about idealism, like in the proper sense. Like you think this is actually is a very plausible scenario, especially
That's-
for what I've shown him.
That's a lot of progress, actually.
Yeah,
You know,
I mean, he loved it when I showed him first.
would you say, Johannan, that like the universe could still have a beginning on the B theory of time?
Yeah, I would say so.
You know, well, I
Okay.
was generally talking about like Avicenna and his argument, which would apply to the B theory of time, which would make the B theory, even on the B theory, it would make it still.
This is, by the way, oh, go ahead. Sorry. There'll still be a beginning. There'll still be a beginning point. I mean, I mean, in a sense, you would say maybe it's not a cause anymore because cause and effect happens in time, but you still have a contingent reason, you know?
Yeah.
So all you do is replace a cause with a contingent reason, which is like, the universe had a first reason. Okay. Big
I have
deal. It's
I have a
a
question.
change in language. Go ahead.
I have a question. So you would agree that obviously space and time are emergent, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so but if block time has to, if it requires this objective space time, then how could you have objective space time if under emergent space time there is no real objective space time, so to speak? I mean that would seem, it wouldn't falsify B theory, but it would falsify at least the block time version of B theory. And that would actually make perfect sense under an idealist metaphysics. So, how would you agree with that, or would you?
I don't think you'd have to have B theory, A theory, or I don't think if you could have idealism with A or B theory, but I think
I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about A theory. What I'm talking about is, once you get rid of objective space-time, then you still have B theory, but you don't have the block time version of it.
Maybe the problem then is you have all reference frames. All you do is define one object that's moving at the speed of light, and then from that frame there would still be all of space-time laid out as though it were a film strip.
Okay, but again, again, we're talking about metaphysics here.
I know, but metaphysics has to incorporate physics. Like it has to take into account the fact that like a photon will actually see all of space-time stretched out.
Yeah, let's see if I can put what Alan had said there.
I want to see what happens if we were to give Tim Maudlin explanatory continuity and have it applied to theism, and see what a condition for theism being true would be.
Would you say also Johan, would you say that on the B theory, time is like whole and essentially ordered?
Generally, yes. Of course, it would depend on reference frames. So there may be a bunch of it may be like a twisty block with lots of twists in it. I mean, when you talk about block universe, I mean, you've seen an image of a space-time manifold, right?
Yeah.
This classic picture of a rubber sheet with a billiard ball in it.
Yeah.
And you have different trajectories on that, right? So it wouldn't look like a block. It would more like a four-dimensional object described by, general relativity, that kind of thing.
Well, the reason why I ask is because, it goes back to the Avicenna thing. Who was he granted that that infinites can exist, but that they can only exist if they meet certain conditions. And,
I think there is one way I could imagine an infinite existing. And that is infinite number of Platonic forms.
Well, here's how Avicenna puts it. Quantities that are both whole and essentially ordered cannot exist as an actually infinite. On the B series, time meets Avicenna's wholeness and ordering conditions. Therefore, on B series, time is not actually infinite.
Say it again.
Quantities that are both whole and essentially ordered cannot exist as an actual infinite. On the B series, time meets Avicenna's wholeness and ordering conditions.
Interesting.
The B series, time
that may be true. That may be true. Of course, now there is the question of, William Lane Craig's going to say, well, then does that mean heaven goes on forever? Because he likes to use theology to dictate the metaphysics, which I think is very backwards. But let's suppose we do that. I have a theory there. Let's suppose that's the case, because I always thought that the universe had to have some kind of ending, What if, though, in God's mind, there are, we talked about, MOND, for example, a modified Newtonian dynamics, here or elsewhere, but where there are multiple frequency domains in Hilbert space with different universes in them, right? You could have we just go on to the next universe, as it were, we're actually
Right.
free to explore all these things once,
Right, exactly.
Heaven is not just one place, it's a whole domain of places, as it were.
Just because our universe may have an ending doesn't mean that the heaven can't move to some other universe, because
Exactly,
you could have a multiverse of universes.
And by the way, that multiverse, if we go with a modal realist route, it's all platonic forms in God's mind. What was the one thing I said I could imagine being infinite? Platonic forms.
Platonic, yep.
Uh-huh.
Well, here's, Avicenna gives it like this, this will tie back into the B theory, but, let's just go for this example first that, that they put into the philosophy. Imagine two identical rigid beams named O and R, and we extend them infinitely from Earth into space. Next step, we remove a section from the beam R, which is Earth to the edge of our galaxy, and call it X. Now we begin the absurdity.
Okay, these two things are infinitely long, right? These two things are infinitely long, you said?
So we remove the section from the beam R, which is the Earth to the edge of our galaxy, and we call that X.
Yep.
And now this begins absurdities, because both are said to be infinite, but we subtracted from beam R, which makes it shorter than beam O.
But no, it's shorter, and then I've had something similar to this, where I actually argue against absolute space in a similar kind of way, where argue, in order to find the center of an empty universe, well, how do you do that, right?
Yeah.
You have to measure off infinity from both ends, right? Because there's nothing else to measure it by. The idea of absolute space is not determined by a particle, right? So you got to measure off infinity from both ends to find the center point, right?
Yeah.
But half of infinity is also infinity. So cut one of those two infinities in half, right? So now the center point, which defines the absolute space, is infinitely far away from itself. Same kind of absurdity, right?
Yeah, the whole problem is like when you try to add or subtract or divide from one, you have them where they're supposed to be infinite, but logically speaking, they should be shorter.
Exactly. And so that's that. By the way, that's why I reject absolute space.
So,
On philosophical grounds.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Now, they have said, I've heard one person say, this is actually Andrew, believe it or not, said that he thought that maybe it could be solved by having space just stop, right? But that doesn't make any sense to me, having space just, because it's like saying having the last number,
Well, yeah, and I don't know. I don't see how you can have absolute space as finite, so to speak.
And then there are people like William Lane Craig who say, well, God just defines it, right?
Yeah.
Well, the problem with that is firstly, it supposes that God does define it. Like, there's no reason to assume that it's there for God. It's not something that, there's no reason to assume God would bother to define it in the first place. Let's suppose that he would anyway, right? So you got to break it down to two ways. Well, how would God define it? He defines it either as an object or via some other property, okay? Attributed to God, right? Well, if he defines that as an object, his being an object, right, in itself, as apart from him being God and having these other properties, is no different than any other object, right?
Right.
So you can't define it via, an object being in one place. How does an object define something in location? It defines by being in that location, in that velocity and moving, right?
Right.
So therefore, God wouldn't define absolute space insofar as he is an object, because insofar as he is an object, he would just have another relative frame just like everything else. So he'd have to define it by some other property other than his being an object, right?
Right.
The problem is that if you go on that route and it's some other property like his divinity or something that defines it that way, then, well, it's the objectness that is what defines location in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Through location and reference frame, and so on, right? But the other part of him that is not an object, that is properties apart from being an object, then, he has other properties other than being an object, do not have the properties needed to define absolute space. Now, you could say maybe he just does it by miraculous power or something, right? But that's not an explanation. That's an appeal to magic. And you can't go there, right?
I mean, you can't,
So whichever way you cut this, it doesn't make sense to say God defines. I should actually write a paper like that and put it in a philosophy journal, like a philosophy religion journal, because this is like, maybe this is like an extra pet peeve of mine, because coming from a physics background, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would read, when I was younger, I read Michio Kaku and Brian Greene at the library. And then later on, I went and studied the stuff as, physics in, actual university.
Yeah.
What they're doing with relativity and Bohmian mechanics, it would be laughed out of any university.
Any university?
Well, almost any physics. I should say any physics department. It would be laughed out of any
respectable physics department. Yeah. So I just I don't.
It might be talked about in some philosophy of science department, but it's not
ridiculous.
Physics, they are not going to. This would not even be a question. It would be like this is. Like
when I don't even
drop the pseudoscience, please. You're embarrassing us.
Like, how do they even get around quantum? Like, they would have to literally overtake all of quantum field theory to pull this off.
There's no way because it's absurd. I mean,
because
God defines an absolute reference frame by magic. You can't define it as via being an object, because, as I pointed out, is being an object insofar as it is only the object properties, no different than any other object. If you want to say, well, he's God, well, that's fine, but then you've got to that is a separate set of properties.
Yeah, then you're not doing science.
It's no longer. Yeah, exactly. It's the whole thing. I mean, and then how many of these physicists are atheists? They're not even gonna what is this? This is just a bunch of religious mumbo jumbo. They're gonna say,
Yeah.
And then the thing, and the thing with this, they say as though they talk about it as though it's just obvious, right?
Mm-hmm. Well,
remember when I was in apologetics class, when we talked about first cause arguments, said we're assuming here, of course, everyone takes the standard view of time. What do you mean the standard view of time? Because in physics department, that's B theory. I mean, it's not even questioned. That is the standard view of time in science is B theory, and oh no, and the problem with us also is they usually don't have good philosophical arguments. They have either things that base on some religious pretext, which is what they're trying to argue for in the first place, making a vicious circle,
properly basic,
or this garbage about proper basicality, which it's so.
I mean, you saw that. Once I saw Matthew say that, I'm just like, are you serious? You're really gonna argue that?
They think that A theory is properly what?
No. They think physical realism is properly based.
Oh no, bullshit. Yeah.
I mean, it's absurd. It's and they do this all. I mean, the thing about that is you've seen what Matthew said. You've seen that before, haven't you?
Yeah.
Who have you seen it from before?
Earth is properly basic too.
Kyle, who else have you seen that before from?
Tim, not you, Tim, but another Tim Reed, and I forgot the other guy's
name.
Ricardo, right?
Yeah.
I think they're actually.
Do we see what?
Well, he's I mean, I don't know.
Where are all these zombies coming from?
Daniel Dennett.
No. Okay, well, Daniel Dennett is another zombie of a different kind. Okay, and what Daniel Dennett done is about as stupid as what they're doing. What Daniel Dennett does with consciousness is about as stupid what they do with physics.
The walking Daniel Dennetts.
I mean, literally, what they do. I mean, the way those people were. I mean, Patricia. I mean, I don't know what Daniel Dennett's official stated position is on quantum mind theory. However, what?
It's over my head.
It's what?
I think his default position is it's over my head.
Okay, but he doesn't state it's wrong as such, right? Patricia Churchland has compared it to magic pixies in the brain. Patricia Churchland has a similar position. So the point here is, well, wait a minute. Patricia Churchland, I mean, it's a very whether or not you agree with quantum mind theory, and I know Derek here does not, but even if you regardless of what you think about it, right, it's a natural fit, right? Because the concept of a first person, perception, right? You don't see first person concepts in matter, but you do see them in the observer effect. The observer effect in quantum mechanics is the only thing that bridges the first person with the third person, because the first person causes something to happen to the third person in a very direct. I mean, that's where you see it. There is, there's wave function that is supposedly third person, and the collapse.
Right.
There's this measurement there, which is first person. The measurement is the observation, and that's what you see is you're literally collapsing a piece of qualia out, right? When you think, wait a minute here, if it's a piece of qualia, then number one, you've got a bridge. There is something that was third person generating a first person thing, which is a qualia. You're not seeing particles on observation. You're seeing qualia. Maybe not at the microscopic scale, but when you scale up with macrorealism or macrorealism being falsified due to Garg-Leggett, it comes out, right?
Right. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know where these. I mean, I don't know. I mean, these zombies, different kinds of zombies, but
okay. So the point being is, it's a very natural.
With philosophical zombies, I think it suffers from being very ill-defined.
Well, I think it's very well defined. I mean, it's very easy to. All it is
if you ask different philosophers, you'll get different definitions.
Okay, well, all it is a being that looks conscious on third person, from third person measurement, but doesn't have any subjectivity. And that's very easy to imagine. All you do is you imagine the third person part without the first person part.
Oh no, I've seen. I've read into some of what's his face. We've discussed him before. David Chalmers. He's the one that got into the whole philosophical zombie. I've read some of his work, and I've read other,
right. Okay, but what? Back to my main point, though. What I was getting at, though, is that quantum mind theory is a very whether or not you agree with it or the reasoning behind it, it's a very natural way to go about explaining the mind, right? Because you have, you're trying to explain first person stuff, and the observer effect in quantum mechanics is the only place that first person stuff shows up in physics. And so there's some connection there, or at least there is some reason to believe there should be a connection there, even if maybe you disagree with that.
That makes a lot of sense, like especially with like how our understanding of like heaven and hell and kind of how the mind fits into that. Which I want to get back to the kind of original discussion here, which was the problem of evil. I know Johanna knew.
Okay. I was gonna finish up real fast though about the whole thing.
I want to hear what
basically.
Okay.
They reject quantum mind theory, right? They say no, that has nothing first person to do, nothing to do with mind at all. But then they say, oh, now that we've gotten our materialism back from getting rid of quantum, the metaphysical implications of quantum mechanics, now we're going to try and explain consciousness. But we're going to do it by rejecting consciousness. And okay, that's sticking your whole head up your ass, right? But now the problem is that in a very similar fashion, they reject a simple solution to create a problem that isn't there.
Right.
Right. And that's exactly what the William Lane Craig guys do with physics.
Well, you have to remember, on William Lane Craig's view that, animals don't experience pain.
But he still thinks there's humans that have consciousness. I can tell you right now that's wrong. I mean, animals do experience pain, but so the point, but he still believes humans have consciousness.
They don't have pain like we do.
Okay, but he still believes we have pain, right? So there still is. I'm not talking about his consciousness view, by the way. I'm talking about his physics view. It's similar in that he creates a problem by, I mean, literally, it takes in. He tries to mangle quantum mechanics horrendously with this Bohmian nonsense, right? Very highly ad hoc. I mean, we've been over that before, and they're going to deny black and blue that it's up and down that it's ad hoc, but it's very ad hoc, right? And they're going to then, so he creates that problem there, right?
Right.
but then or rejects that as a solution for it. It's a very natural way to solve the problem of mind. It's a very natural way to argue for God, as we've demonstrated. The whole quantum idealism thing is based on the fact that it's a very natural way to argue for God.
It's also a good way to argue for his substance dualism as well. So.
Yeah, and so then he rejects that, and then he creates this humongous problem. Number one, there's no interaction mechanism for dualism.
Right.
And number two, there is no even if you were to reject dualism, then you have idealism, and he has no scientific explanation for any. It's all just God did it by magic. You go to the afterlife by magic. What?
I mean, you would still I do agree with you. Like, dualism is absurd. That that's one of the main things that really got me out of a lot of my beliefs, was just realizing how absurd dualism is.
Oh, you mean when you were religious?
Yeah.
Gotcha. That's the thing, is I realized dualism was false at age 14, and then because I realized for it to exist, it would have to basically be magic. And then I didn't go materialist, so I just shifted into neutral monism, which then verged into pan-experientialism, which then became idealism.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily good to say that dualism is magic. I mean, maybe.
Okay, his version of it though is, because he's gotten rid of the
this version,
problem.
yes, the Bohemian Mechanics version is, yes.
Yeah, it's bad.
But what I'm saying is that if a dualist was to hold to the orthodox interpretation, he at least has some explanation for interaction.
We need to talk to Tim Maudlin about his atheism, though.
Well, he was at the Carol Craig debate. He gave a paper there on how the universe wasn't caused.
Oh, and what was his argument?
I can't remember off the top of my head, but
because
I think Sean Carroll didn't he criticize Bohemian Mechanics? Like, he pointed out that the equation just didn't work.
Let me take a look.
Was it the second best option next to the many worlds interpretation?
Oh, the funniness about this? Sean Carroll just made an argument. He tweeted about Bernardo Kastrup's Scientific American.
Yeah,
and it was like Retardo Land, right?
Yeah,
different Retardo Land, right?
Yeah.
Craig is off in Retardo Land number 1, and Carroll is off in Retardo Land number 2, right? But the thing about it is I'm with Craig on the theism thing, and I'm with Carroll on the Bohemian Mechanics thing.
Yeah, the physics
thing. And so we're like fighting a 3-way war here. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. I know. It's ridiculous.
But I would like to see. That's the funny thing about it is Sean Carroll and William Lane Craig are both half sane in their given respects.
Right.
And they're both very well established and people I really respect.
I mean,
in certain areas.
Yeah.
I really respect William Lane Craig's philosophy of religion, and I really respect Sean Carroll's quantum gravity research.
Right. And did you see Sean Carroll's what his take was on philosophical zombies?
No. What was it? Was something really bad?
Yeah, I think I posted it on one of the groups. He basically said that we're all zombies.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Okay, so wait a minute. So let me get this straight. He says Bernardo Kastrup is crazy for thinking that quantum mechanics is sufficient grounds to question the nature of reality, right? The metaphysical underpinnings. Yet at the same time, he will take those same metaphysics he's trying to salvage to argue for that we're all zombies.
Pretty much. I mean,
are these people insane? Like this whole thing here. Remember I talked to you about the thing where academia needs to be Donald Trumped?
Yeah.
Like someone has to go in there and like the same thing, Trump did to politics, right? Someone has got to do that to academia.
Like what Alvin Plangia did to philosophy of religion. That's what needs to happen. Because I know Alvin Plangia before in philosophy of religion was almost dead, but then he came in and just basically saved it. So something like
someone has to happen to cognitive science. Which would include, philosophy of science, philosophy of mind, neuroscience, and physics. Those things, the instrumentalism has to be Donald Trump out of physics. The materialism has to be Donald Trump out of philosophy of mind, and the quantum mind theory has to be Donald Trumped, and the functionalism has to be Donald Trumped out of neuroscience, but then quantum mind theory has to be like put in the same way.
Neuroscience is the worst.
Neuroscience is horrendous. I mean, philosophy of mind, there is at least a sizable percentage of them that will point out that this is like, there's a lot of philosophers like Chalmers. They're not a majority of them, but there are still a large plurality,
But once you get to neuroscience, it just seems
they're
like
completely retarded.
no, but it seems like the mainstream view of neuroscience is materialism itself, even though it's ridiculous.
It's idiotic. It's not even coherent.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you're calling yourself a process. Well, wait a minute. A process is something that to imagine a process, you have to imagine a process. But you can imagine the mind without a process. I mean, the very fact that you can imagine anything else demonstrates the mind can't be a process.
Yeah.
They're
they're
not the same thing.
Hylomorphic dualism.
Anything else? Mind can't be a process. No, I had a bit of a echo there.
No, it's Tim. Tim, you're yeah.
Okay, so it's a process. Okay, well, hylomorphic dualism is not actually a substance dualism, I've realized.
No, it's the property dualism.
No, hylomorphic dualism. It's a substance form dualism. There's like a substance that has a form to it, like it's kind of a weird dualism. But
so and the
thing about it doesn't tell you anything about the fundamental nature of the substance itself, though,
Yeah, and well, I mean, at least if okay,
it only has one substance to it.
So it's still but it's monism, but it's not monism. I'm confused between.
That's the weird thing about it's monism, but not monism exactly. But the thing about it is insofar as is monism, who's to say that monistic substance is not idealism?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but whatever.
I mean, there's no reason to think that it shouldn't be. And in fact, for it to connect to mind in that way, you'd think it would number one have. Yeah, I don't know. I have some issues, by the way. I don't know if this is just Thomism, but I think it's with Aristotle in general. I've seen it with objectivism. They like the objectivists, for example, they get this from Aristotle, it seems, and they will question beg physical realism.
Yeah.
Now they do this by saying in a way that you can't have the world being an illusion because it has to be an illusion. Okay, yes, in a technical sense, you have to have a reality, right? The problem is that there is about an illusion. There is an ontology to what you would call an illusion, right? Whether or not you call it that, don't even call it an illusion yet. There is an ontology. It's a set of perceptions that are there, right? Behind them. Nothing physical behind them anyway. Well, who's to say that you can't have reality be that way? You don't have to call it an illusion if you don't want to, but it could be. It's a set of perceptions with nothing physical behind them, and maybe whatever is behind them has a mental ontology along the lines of the perceptions themselves,
like a dream, basically.
Yeah, so it's not actually an illusion as such, right?
Right.
So yes, they are right in saying that you have to have a reality before you can have an illusion. But what if that is the reality? It's not an illusion because in the very technical sense, an illusion has a reality, that is something that's not an illusion. But it still could be a set of perceptions with nothing behind them.
Right.
And they seem to totally question beg away that. They say that you have to have consciousness. Consciousness is conscious of something, and it's not. They don't treat a perception as a thing. They treat it as something that it is conscious of, like it's a property or an aspect. Like it doesn't. The way they use language in some respects in that regard doesn't make sense.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So I'll be back in like 30 seconds, but what's your take on the problem of evil?
Mine?
It depends, if you mean me or Johan or both of us? Well, I guess it's me. I think it depends on which one you mean. There isn't just one problem of evil argument. There's you can get into the the evidence, like the probabilistic or the logical. Now the logical is pretty much dead, but the probabilistic is still there and kicking.
And even among the evidential and probabilistic, there's a number of different arguments, whether it be animal suffering or pain and pleasure or just a general thing. Yeah.
Oh, if I may recommend, like if you guys want to learn more about heliomorphic dualism,
Hylomorphic dualism.
yeah. If you're just in general curious about it, I would recommend David S. Oderberg. He wrote a paper entitled it, heliomorphic dualism. It's a bit long, but it's very laid out.
By the way, this would be lovely. Did you see that one thing a while back about how there was an equation, a quantum equation, showed that the universe didn't have a beginning? You guys remember the article I'm talking about?
Yeah, but I don't. I mean that.
Did you know? Did you know what physics that equation was using?
Quantum gravity?
No, it was using a specific kind of quantum gravity based on something very specific.
The holographic principle?
Nope.
Emergent space-time?
Nope.
Well then, I'm out of options.
Bohmian mechanics. Now, what I would love to see happen is someone to demonstrate a strict equivalence, showing that Bohmian mechanics necessarily leads to that. It would be lovely because it would just blow the whole thing right out. This ridiculous house of cards they have,
yeah,
would come tumbling down.
Oh God. Yeah, because it seemed all right. I don't want to get. We started talking about.
I want to find Sean Carroll on Bohmian mechanics. This sounds like he's got some really good points to make about it.
I know. IP on his video on a critique of Bohemian mechanics, he did use a part of Sean Carroll's criticism when Sean Carroll was talking about it, but I'm not sure exactly what his points were.
Well, did you notice the way Matthew was describing IP's video?
Yeah, what was it like? Kind of
about how it's all chock full of misrepresentations, and it's
like I don't know, like I hear that all the time. Like,
didn't they have Tim Maudlin on there saying
I saw you. Yeah, I sent you a screenshot of that.
They were really going over the top about that, weren't they?
Yeah, like not like I don't know. It seems like every single time like something on Bohemian Mechanics shows up, they screenshot like an actual physicist to like prove their point. Like they have to actually go to the physicists themselves that support Bohemian Mechanics in order to like defend it. Because
it's not. I mean, the fact they have to do that is ridiculous. Number one. I mean, in a sense, they can say we're doing that too because we take a screen clip, but we take these video clips. But the thing is, those video clips are like all over the place, and it's stuff that's already known out. It's not like they have to go out of their way. We don't have to go out of our way to find it.
Right.
Well,
but the thing about
just so to get people to know it, like heliomorphic dualism, like the Aristotelian Thomas position of it, it claims that living things are a compound of matter and substantial form.
Yeah.
And the latter is the soul.
Right. And there is a way to get that directly out of quantum idealism, by the way, including the so-called Holland-Merrick property of it, where the essence of it is spread out equally everywhere, like it's contained in all the parts.
Well,
and that is, you take quantum entanglement. Entanglement generates space-time, right? So there is a space-time, a substance which has a geometry in space-time, right? That's your substance, right? And there's a form behind it, which is the soul. Well, okay, what's behind it? There's a pattern of entanglement, right? Mm-hmm. So the entanglement pattern is generating the whole. I mean, that's the whole point of emergent spacetime from entanglement. A specific pattern of entanglement will create a specific geometry in spacetime. But furthermore, that entanglement, when you bring in quantum cognition, well, what is quantum entanglement, and more specifically, what is quantum coherence, which would include quantum entanglement? Mm-hmm. It's a mental state, right? According to quantum cognition, it's a mental state. So you have that mental state generating this substance out there in the world, right? There's your soul. soul matter dualism, right? It's a form substance dualism. Plus, the parts are said to be located in the whole. The essence of the whole is contained in all the parts, right?
Mhm.
So you can't separate any one of the parts of the whole without it not being the whole anymore. Well, how is entanglement defined? Anyone know? That's literally exactly how quantum entanglement is defined, isn't it?
Right.
It's the entire quantum state here is linked with the other quantum states that they're the same quantum state. You can't dissociate them, and then the quantum state defines the whole. There is no one quantum state for each particle. They have a shared single identity quantum state that defines the whole system as a single essence. There is holomerism, so it's literally the exact copy of hylomorphism popping out of. And I'm not certain about all aspects of Thomism. I think there are some aspects that I like, other aspects I think are. I'm not going to say reject outright, maybe, but like I'm just kind of uneasy about them. But there are some part, like that part though, is really good. Like you just pull it out and it's like a really beautiful.
Well, as long as you don't use Aristotelian physics, you're okay.
Aristotelian physics.
Oh,
he
God.
believed that he believed that things, like Aristotle believed that things fell to the ground because they were naturally attracted to it.
Right.
He also believed that eels didn't reproduce.
Yeah. So
What do you think?
I think that's outdated physics, but yeah.
What did he think reproduce?
He didn't think eels reproduced.
Eels do not reproduce, he thinks.
I mean,
Oh,
Yeah.
he also
Weird.
believed
I think
that
we'll have to
women-
give
he
him a
also
little bit of slack on that one.
He's
Yeah.
old, he's thousands of years old. He couldn't have known.
Exactly.
Well,
Can't,
he also
you can't really
believed that
judge
women
him.
were deformed men.
Yeah. Again, you can't.
Like, legitimately, he made a science out of determining the difference between women and men. And he kept arguing that women were fundamentally broken.
Say that again. What did he think?
He thought that women, were just.
He's not
broken.
wrong.
Like, he argued that women have fewer teeth than men.
I want to see that argument.
What?
It's ridiculous.
Show that to like a feminist studies.
Oh,
Like, he had like
Oh, no.
he legitimately made a science out of being sexist.
Let's take a minute here.
You know what's funny is I've actually seen Straussians take some of that stuff up. There was one leftist feminist who was complaining about this. And they were saying, and the thing was, the way she was making it was kind of a good point, because these Straussians, they tended to be conservative, but they also tended to be kind of like geekish hacks, as it were, at times. And so he would say they would have there were these men with soft hands giving intellectual who've never touched a lawnmower in their life or a car, engine, are giving intellectual disquisitions on the superiority of men over women because Aristotle said so and he was right. And now, I mean, that's ridiculous. But the funny thing about this is that's like a perfect medicine for modern feminism. Is it not? I mean, literally, it is like a taste of their own medicine. It's like two peas in a pod.
exactly.
Well, I mean, Aristotle, he legitimately made a science out of trying to show how fundamentally broken women were compared to men. Like, he said they had fewer teeth than men. He said everything.
Oh shoot!
That's retarded. That is retarded.
Aristotle was retarded.
Say what?
Oh man.
The way that's worded, fundamentally broken.
I can just imagine that showing up in a in academic paper somewhere in the abstract. And then we conclude, as a consequence of these scientific findings, that women are fundamentally broken. And this article has been published in Nature August 2017.
It even supports the fallen state.
I mean, this is so demented. It's demented. Okay, your laughter is demented.
Oh shit! Women are fundamentally broke.
Oh, that's awful.
It really is awful.
Oh, that's. Dude, that whoever's talking, whoever's talking.
I think they're fundamentally broken.
Fundamentally broken.
Oh no! Whoever's talking is like undergoing spaghettification right now. Like,
What the heck is that background noise?
how far away from your mic are you?
It's poor Derek trying to talk, and he just
Man, this hangout is
try and talk louder so we can stop. Please.
What the heck?
So are we ever gonna get to the problem of evil?
Oh, you're back. Okay, you were.
Yeah. So my view on the problem of evil is that if you think about metaphysics, right? Okay, so you get to God. I mean, not God as like a. We're not getting into the omnibenevolent part, but just God as a metaphysical being, right? A super mind that contains everything, right?
right.
That mind will have to also contain all value sets, correct?
Yeah.
We'll have to do so in such a way that because it contains all of them, it has to value all of them at once, right? So whatever the value set of that one mind is, it's going to have to necessarily be shared by all their value sets, even minds, even if maybe on a local scale it will appear not to be the case because those minds are maybe misaligned with it somehow, right?
Right.
So whatever it creates has to be good, right? So you have to basically God's mind is a God becomes omnibenevolent as an axiom because of the metaphysics, right?
Right, you're deriving gods. Yeah.
Yeah, because he contains all value sets, and therefore all value sets have to agree with him, even if they may not appear to, right?
Right.
At face value, because of the way things are distorted down here, they may appear that they're against you see how many atheists that think that God is horrible because of his political implications, etc. But we get past that though, and we see God as all value sets are aligned with him, right? So then we see how does that get broken up, and we just simply see that it's a distortion in a good creation. It's like take a broken piece of pottery, okay, or take a glass, drop it on the floor, right? The glass shatters apart, and the shattered pieces are, they're bad. You'll step your foot on, you get cut, right?
Yeah.
Put them back together though, and they form a good glass. And that's how evil appears, even though that scenario is perfectly consistent with God having an omnibenevolent reference ring.
I also may point out, generally, philosophers have given up the logical problem of evil. Generally, almost no philosophers hold to it anymore. Mainly, the money is on the probabilistic version.
And even yeah. And
the reason why they don't use the logical problem, the reason why they don't use the logical version anymore is because of these simple two facts. In order to make the logical problem work, you would have to establish two things. One, that free will is logically impossible, or is very improbable. And two, you'd have to establish that God could not have a just reason for allowing evil.
Right. And they're gonna and I can't think of a contemporary philosopher who uses the logical problem of evil in terms of any peer reviewed thing like that, because And they've really, at this point in philosophy of religion, punted to pain and pleasure being more that it's naturalism has better explanatory power for that, and then animal suffering. They say that gratuitous animal suffering um,
Well,
is
you know
better
what I
explained than
argue,
naturalism.
from, since I am a deist Christian apologist, you know, yep,
Hmm.
and I'm not ashamed of that at all, but,
That's cool.
you know,
I have
with,
a question, Derek,
yes,
real fast before we get there. You mentioned you're but you lost a lot of your religious beliefs by realizing dualism was nonsense, right?
yeah,
If many of those same things were reformatted in an idealist framework, would that make it not nonsense to you?
um, I haven't really, given, um, idealism, like, I've looked into idealism, I've looked at critiques of idealism and stuff like that. I mean, I would have to do more research, before I make any
Right.
commit.
But would it make sense to you? I mean, I'm not saying adopt it right off the bat, but would it make religion a lot more plausible toward you? Like, it's something you could rehabilitate?
Arguably, yes. I mean, arguably, yes. It would, I liked how IP is, like, I've watched some of IP videos. I think, he's argued for it the best.
Hmm.
I could see his, like, you guys disagree on some things. I've been told, like, on,
It's small things like the nature of how exactly consciousness relates to collapse. But
so,
we
I
both
mean,
think it's a mental simulation in God's mind. We both think it's made of God's thoughts, etc.
so, I mean, so, I mean, I do think IP and them, like, so I did watch that, and I do think he makes a very good, compelling case, although, I generally, I've looked into some critiques of them, some contemporary philosophers. Like, philosophers generally, sadly, I mean, like, well, not sadly for me, but more sad for you guys, are like, they tend to be materialist and
Hmm.
atheist. Well, what's funny is, like, people tend to think that A and B theory of time is like they can't be either, like, they have to be one or the other, when most philosophers don't hold to either. They don't hold to either A or B theory of time. They hold, like, to some mix between the two.
Well,
But I
if you
mean,
just search for A theory or B theory on like Academia edu in terms of papers,
So I'm
you're not gonna
I'm
get it.
looking at Carol's Twitter feed right
Wait,
now,
wait.
right?
Hold on. What's Tim? What were you gonna say?
But basically, that philosophy of time is basically dead. The physics is pretty much overrun it.
Who said that?
A philosophy of time is dead.
No, who said that? Where that? Where's that?
Let me pull that up.
Someone needs to remind William Lane Craig of that and
Well,
his
it's,
horde of zombies.
well, I would say philosophy. I mean, I don't think philosophy of time. I mean, I think
I don't
it's.
think
Might have been Quentin Smith or something.
I think a better way to put it is like philosophy of time should examine the philosophical implications of like special
well,
and general relativity and stuff.
well,
Like,
if it makes, Johannan will think it's more dead when you consider the fact that William Lane Craig is considered the leading philosopher of time.
You gotta be kidding me.
the
Well, he
leading.
is. He is.
Because he's the only one talking about it anymore. Because everyone else, it's like he's got the participation award because no one else even bothers with it.
Yeah. Well, well.
Quentin Smith is an atheist, and he holds to the A theory time too.
Yeah, I know, but I mean,
So
Well, I think he defends it mainly to defend his Kalam argument. That's really the only reason.
the thing is, why do you need to defend it in that? I mean, you can make an equivalent. There's a Leibnizian
Yeah.
contingency argument, which
I
is,
know.
and you can make I saw. I mean, this guy is no longer active on YouTube, but I remember a theistic thinker made an argument from. He made a B theory version of the Kalam.
Oh yeah, you can. Callum Miller. Callum Miller's an Oxford philosopher who developed a Bayesian reconstruction of the Kalam based on B theory, and it works. It runs just like pretty much the same. You just have to change a few terms.
Like, why can't William Lane Craig do that?
Well, I mean, here's
Well-
what's funny.
I don't know. Whatever.
You could redefine, like, you could keep the argument the exact same, but all you would have to do is change, like, the term of beginning to exist to something to be more compatible with the B theory of time, because some B theorists, contrary to what Sheen Carroll says about it, some B theorists do hold that the universe is finite in the past. So
Right. But I think, well, yeah.
and they do say, like, some of them do say that, time, it does still begin to exist, but in a different sense. Like, well, all you'd have to do is, define beginning to exist as, X begins to exist at T. If X exists at T and there is no moment earlier than T at which X exists.
Yeah.
Which would be perfectly compatible on a B theory of time. So,
Yep.
I mean, you wouldn't even have to really change even the form of the argument, really. You just have to change the definition.
Mhm.
Because really, all it hangs on is beginning to exist. And people
Yeah.
have different ways of saying, like, even B theorists will say that time begins to exist in a sense.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what I believe.
So, I mean, you could
All you do is
argue
you take the same sense. There's a start of the timeline. There's physics before that timeline. I mean, that's the whole point of quantum gravity.
Yeah, so I mean,
The whole point of quantum gravity is that there is a beginning. There is a cause, even if it's a timeless cause.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah. Like, even if the moment of the Big Bang exists tenselessly, it doesn't need to have existed for all eternity.
Yeah, that's interesting. I once had a talk with William Lane Craig, and he mentioned that if time emerges, space time emerges, it has to emerge simultaneously.
Yeah. He's a big fan of the simultaneous causation.
That's okay with me, and that makes sense.
Well, I mean, you have to think of it like a ball resting on a pillow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He uses the...
And the way I think about it is more of a structural thing anyway. Like, it's to me, it's like it's a structural emergence. There's this explanation that's described with the math and has an ontological structure to it. It's a reality behind space. I mean, even if it's not a... And what we're seeing, our world is in a sense an emanation of it. Put it that way.
Oh, if I also may add something, like, just to go on the probabilistic version, it's not as much of a problem with Christianity than it would be other religions. Because, because in Christianity, like, the probability of suffering is actually more increased on the Christian worldview, as there's 3 doctrines that increase the probability of suffering in the world.
Of the fallen state.
Well, because A, the purpose of life isn't happiness, but to come to know God.
That makes God bad, though, is the problem.
Well, no, but here's another thing. B, people are in a state of rebellion against God.
That makes sense.
And 3, God's purpose spills over into the afterlife. It doesn't just end here. And people who are in heaven would say their happiness now is worth any suffering that they experience then.
One thing that pisses me off as an existential thing, not as a philosophical thing, but as an existential thing, is we don't get to experience or have any category of the blessing in heaven, right? So basically down here is judged on something that is not something that we have access to.
Oh, I have an experience of heaven.
You do? Really? Tell me.
It's like it's an orgasm.
Oh, good grief.
Oh my God.
Who's laughing at that? Jeez Louise.
I'm sorry.
I saw it coming. I knew it. For I knew that was. I knew it. Oh man.
You are fundamentally broken, my friend.
This whole hangout we've got. Oh boy.
Well, when when I'm coming on, this is gonna happen.
Yep.
But anyway,
No, you're just gonna try to recover from that. Like, oh yeah.
But the problem of evil, I'd also say that we're not in a position to say, what God would probably do, because, of course, we're just mere finite-minded creatures, and God is not.
Mm-hmm.
Well, right. That's this skeptical theism does a good. It doesn't do a really good existential or like personal job of explaining problem of evil, which is kind of the most important part. But
Mm-hmm.
it definitely um, it neutralizes the evidential problem of evil, because if we don't know what God will do in a certain circumstances, of course you can't say that something is necessarily evil.
Well, I mean, and here, and here's another thing is like, probability always depends on background information.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you accumulate the background evidence for God, that would greatly, impact, what is evil and what isn't.
You can't look at it in a vacuum.
Well, no, I look, I look at it as like a broom.
Right.
But it all depends like on background information, and that greatly increases the probability or decreases it, however perspective.
You should talk to Christopher McHugh about the problem of evil, because he has a thing that solves both the evidential problem of it as well as the experiential problem of it. I've never seen a solution better than his.
What is his what is the basic contention there?
Yeah.
What's it called?
No, I was with Tim there. Like, what is?
What's the basic contention that he has?
Well,
there?
he basically argues
justice.
that it's divine justice, and it's like God isn't behind any of it, but like because this evil, God actually, it's very interesting because like when even people are pissed off at God,
yeah,
what he actually showed with one of his visions is that when people are pissed off with God, that's actually God being angry. Because they like think God isn't that weird?
Yeah.
Angry at what though?
At the injustice in the world, that
the
including that of what would appear to be a God that is doing this.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
So he actually shares the atheist anger at God over the problem of evil, which is strange.
But it's not. Yeah.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah, that God is mad at the injustice. Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
When that's sort of.
But the problem is that everyone's desires are like split up again. Everyone's supposed to be a gift to each other, okay? And so like everyone like solves each other's problems. Like you saw in a vision of like heaven where the goodness that happens in heaven happens because it's the saints giving each other a good things as they're being gifts to each other, such that they're a blessing to each other. And that's why it's good. And so it's of course God orchestrates that all, but it's
that sounds extremely similar to your salvation model, or at least how heaven would be like.
Yeah, that's because it's based on it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not completely based on it. It's the salvation aspect is based on it. The fallen state I derive myself, but the salvation aspect
yeah, but,
I realize fits it.
I mean, when you study what heaven would actually be like, that's literally what it would be like. Just people serving others. So,
and so the thing about this is that the reason that there's evil in the world is because it's the pieces are not aligned. The pieces that would normally be giving blessing to each other are now are causing each other harm.
Right.
So that causes God the frustration or.
Mm-hmm.
Have you guys ever heard of the free process defense?
No.
Well, basically, it goes into involuntary, divine self-limitation, and it like where the second form, like there's different forms of it, but the form I'm referring to says that God's failure to interrupt the free processes of creation, like of like natural disasters and stuff like that, comes from God's eternal nature of love. This is like from the providential model, larger, it says that God gives agency and a self-organization to creation, and this giving derives from God's loving nature.
Right.
And
well, the actual the evil of the fallen state. I don't know if did I explain my fallen state model to you?
I think you may have gone into it before, but you know, you could
Not to
remind me.
Dorit.
But
Yeah, you didn't explain it to him. You explained it to us before, but not him.
okay, it's basically, so you know the universe is a simulation, right?
Mhm.
Behind that simulation, and a lot of people don't realize this. Now I know you're a limit of this and all that, but you can kind of grasp where I'm coming from here anyway, right?
Yes, I can grasp it.
The behind the simulation is the shared inner space, and you actually have access to that right now with your own thoughts. You try and think of what your thoughts are; they're not in space. Ideas don't exist in space time. Well, that's the same not in space time of quantum gravity, right? It's the whole space from Hilbert space thing, which when you bring, quantum cognition, that's where thoughts are, is Hilbert space. If you take it literally, that is. So you do that, and you have thoughts behind. This whole thing is behind space time, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so if thoughts are behind space time, then you have this thing, this whole other world behind space time there, right? Evil exists, the fallen state rather, is due to a shattering of the consciousness in the shared inner space behind space time. That includes dissociation between minds as well as dissociation. Like, okay, here, now imagine the unfallen state for a moment, okay? So everything is re-entangled again because now it's all fractured, right? Come outside of that, though, into an unfallen state, right? What does that look like? Everything behind space-time is entangled once again, right? Including all the minds and including, say, my mind would be entangled. Okay, say there's a rock slide outside, right? And it's going to crush a bunch of people's houses and kill people. Okay, but now let's imagine that I had access to the space-time, the entanglements generating those rocks. What could I do with it mentally?
Well,
You'd be like Q.
well,
I mean, take it to a very extreme degree, it'd be like Q powers, wouldn't it? Right?
yeah, my problem with the whole, what's that word? Like the whole fallen state thing,
Mhm.
is it's more theological than obviously where you're going at with a scientific.
Yep.
I go for a more Jewish interpretation of the text.
Well, okay, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I don't think Genesis and stuff like, because here's what's funny, what people don't really think about is like, you know, evil is never really evil and sin is not ever mentioned really in the text in those chapters when you look at it, and
True.
Satan is never referred to as the snake, which is generally what we think of.
Called the Nakash.
So
I know it's not a snake as such; it's something else.
Right.
well, I mean, it depends
We've
on
had
what
discussions about that before, but we're not going to go there.
Yeah, I mean, what I generally hold to is like I believe like the snake was a literal snake, but I believe like when you actually get into the definitions of it, like like when you look into the text, when the snake talks, you can interpret that. When you actually get into the language, you could say like it spoke the way like a human does, but
Mm-hmm.
what the snake really does is like you could say that the snake is more or less points to it, the fruit, instead of like actually speaking. Like Eve, what would happen is like Eve seen the snake eat from the tree, or the snake by the tree, and thought it was okay, and then took from the tree.
Well, you know what the Sumerians thought the snake was, right? Because that same story shows up in the Sumerian
Oh yeah, they
accounts.
borrowed a lot. Well, I mean, not they kind of. Well, here's what's funny about Genesis. Like they're the Genesis authors are well aware of the the pagan stories, and they make fun of them too in a way, and they are very polemic against them, because they want to affirm a different story. Then they want to distinguish themselves from the
Right,
uh,
I know, but the thing is that if they're all basing on the same, I mean, the Sumerian ones were older, but the thing about it is though is that they're different people. I mean, yes, they want to distinguish each other, but it's the point is that it's the same account being described.
If I may recommend like who I typically go to, like
Yep.
when I'm going up with original sin and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I go to. He's one of the best. He's considered one of the best Old Testament, scholars.
Heiser.
No. Walter Brueggemann.
Hmm.
Oh yeah, yeah. Huh.
He's considered like one of the if you want a top notch one, he's the one.
Cool.
I hold to his view, and here's what's funny: he's actually a Christian.
I was about to say, is he? I'm pretty sure he's a Christian.
Yeah, he's a Christian, but he doesn't hold to original sin.
Right. He was really influenced by Irenaeus.
Well, I mean, here's the thing: he really wanted to go into the whole Jewish text. He looked at all the Jewish commentaries. He wanted to try to be as authentic as possible to what the Jewish people were thinking of at the time, and he eventually just came to the point where he just could not believe in original sin anymore.
Because what do you mean by original? Because I've seen different people define it differently.
Well, I mean, if you want my person, obviously I'm a deist, so I don't. But if you're talking about theologically, because I have theological opinions on it in terms of if assuming Christianity is true, I have theological opinions.
Because the reason I bring this up is what you said was a physics-based approach.
Yeah.
Okay, it is kind of a physics-based approach, yes. However, what might surprise you, and this is that you can base this all on conscious realism, you can actually derive the fallen state on 6 separate religions simultaneously, including things that you would not recognize as the fallen state at first, but on closer examination, it's very clear they're the same thing. And it's very fascinating because it demonstrates that this is something that supersedes religion itself. It's not just one religion, it's what they're describing is something. Okay, imagine the following, okay? Okay, so we're going to take the cargo cult analogy, okay? So you have, the whole thing where the World War II pilots are flying over the Polynesian islands, right? What?
I actually got into that with with my friend Robert.
Okay.
Because I was using it to explain, actually it was JMD apologetics. I was going into that because I wanted to explain, how Christianity could have arose.
Yes. So now the thing about this is how do you think, in that explanation, do you think it would have, in that scenario?
I think, generally it was a bunch of misunderstandings of the. I generally believe, because that's how the cargo cults were. They were just big misunderstandings.
Well, that's the thing about it. Is there partial misunderstandings? Yes, but the thing is there is some quote truth to it, unquote, right?
Oh yeah.
Because there are people.
There really are airplanes, and there really are Europeans that drop cargo out of them.
Yeah.
So there is a sense in which these are quote true, unquote. Now, not in quite the same way because they're not really gods, but you could say that there is a way in which you could have an actual god with a cargo cult understanding of said god. And this is the following, okay? So a cargo cult, they would believe that it's a bunch of Bronze Age people, or worse, Stone Age people, which would be, that's the more legitimate cargo cult, but it's the same basic principle. They would see this, they have no understanding of how this works. They say this is magic, right? And they just take it all as dogma, as just because there's no way humans can understand magic, and so we'll just take this as yep.
Let me tell you something.
Well, here's what's funny about
One second.
No, it's cool. Yeah, they can hear this too. Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. There's no way to the Father except through me."
Right.
You know what I mean? Jesus, went up to the cross.
Yeah.
Was crucified, rose 3 days later.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't help but hear it's your voice penetrates every wall in this house because it's really loud.
Oh, shoot.
So I kind of heard your conversation about God and Jesus and stuff.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know all the details, but I don't know. I just thought I'd
cool.
put it out there.
Thanks.
Yeah.
That's appropriate.
Well, I mean, you said you're a believer, right?
Yeah.
You're Christian through and
yeah.
through, right? Okay. As long as you're preaching the word, bro.
Yep. That's good.
Is that like your friend or something?
Yeah, it's a Hangout.
Hangout.
Google Hangout.
That's like an app on the computer.
Yeah, it's on a channel actually.
What's that?
It's on a channel, YouTube channel.
Oh, YouTube
you're on YouTube.
It's live or what?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Well,
that was my housemate, guys.
No, I mean, as long as you're telling me the truth about Jesus, it's all that matters, man.
Yep. Thanks. Yep, that was my housemate. So yeah, so the thing about this is they're actually what they're describing is there's a reality to it, right? but they just don't understand the full reality because they don't understand. Like there is actually God's mind up there. You know what Tom Campbell would refer to as the larger consciousness system. It's all the actual properties of God. They just don't understand that there's actually a mechanics to this, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you get into the mechanics of it, and this is my thesis here, is that there is actually something they're referring to as the fallen state, much like a cargo cult would describe an airplane in the sky, right?
Yeah.
And what they are describing, insofar as they're describing it, is true. They just don't know the full picture yet. And so what happens is you see these other religions, and they all have other descriptions of something that they're describing sounds different, but when you look at it with this model in mind, you discover that, lo and behold, all these other features that show up also pop out. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, I mean, what's funny is like, you know, I read into the Hinduism, and they believe that the universe is trillions of years old.
Yeah, well, this is more, I mean, when we go into cosmogony, that's one thing.
Yeah.
But this is like separate. This like the fallen state would be like something that would be more like immediate. I'm guessing the fallen state would have probably happened in the last,
100,000.
Yeah, well, more like 13,000 probably. I'm guessing years.
Well, it depends on when Adam and Eve.
Right. Well, I think Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
I hold Heiser's view. I don't think Adam and Eve were the first people.
Right.
And I think you can kind of demonstrate that with the whole thing of the text there. What it's saying that it was two different creation accounts. Actually, they talk about man and woman being male and female humans being created. And then it talks about Adam and like it just you always assume they're the same, but it never actually said that in the account.
Yeah, I hold a mixture of John Walton's view and coherent. What's it called? I can't remember the name, but it's like
Coherentist. Yeah.
coherent. Yeah.
No, Concord. You mean Concordist?
Yeah. That's what I meant. Sorry.
Yeah, and it actually makes sense because I mean, having a fallen state around for like 100,000 years before Jesus shows up doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, exactly.
So based on that, I think that they were the ones who first sinned. They had a special purpose in the world. That something probably happened here that was unique, right? And it caused basically it brought this whole issue up, shall we say? Okay. And so then they fell, but then you look at so look at the generations between Adam and Eve and the flood, right? It's like about 1,600 years worth of generations. Yeah. But then you try and put the flood on, and you see, well, there's a lot of problems with the dating of the flood, right? Okay, first you can take the view that it's a super local flood, right?
Right, which would be like Robert Rowe and
yeah, I don't buy that. I don't like the young Earth creationists on the one hand that doesn't work, right? Because it's like flooding Mount Everest, like no, okay. But then there's
don't you take kind of like a moderate, like kind of
it's an in between view. It's more akin to something happened. There's you remember the movie 2012? Do you guys remember the movie 2012?
Yeah. Oh yeah,
it's something akin to that. I think something
near global, but not.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. It was global in a sense, in that it was in extent, just not in coverage.
Right.
I take the worldwide interpretation where it was like, because let's be honest, like the people back then thought the world was flat, and they had a very limited perspective on what they thought the world was.
That's true. However, when you look at it's not just Genesis. It shows up in like world mythology. This notion of a global flood,
right? There's different.
Like they talk about the flood. The world was over the flood. The flood was over. I mean, it shows up in China. It shows up in India. It shows up in Egypt. It shows up in
200. There's like 220 different flood stories.
Yeah, and they describe it as this big global event, right? They all do, and they describe about a world before the flood, and oftentimes they describe about like golden age before the flood, which is kind of cool.
Oh, I mean, I don't deny. I'm just saying, like, this is also supported in Peter, where, the worldwide interpretation, where it was the world as in, it was the world that Noah and his people knew of.
Right. Well, the thing about that is you try and date when that would have been, okay? And when you see places like Jericho, that's a city that's gone into the present, right?
Mm-hmm.
When was that first built, though?
I mean, we all know that the Earth is only like 6,000 years old anyway.
Okay, but you know what I'm saying. I'm saying. When was Jericho built, according to archaeology?
12,000 BC, I think.
9,000 BC. 9,000
Okay,
BC.
I think it's around that. Yeah.
9,300, I think.
Okay, so we have a flood that has to happen before then, right?
Yeah.
Now it gets more interesting that because then you have Göbekli Tepe, which that was in Turkey area, right?
Right.
Supposedly where Noah's Ark was, wherever, right? It's not Ararat that everyone calls Ararat, because that's not actually Ararat. That was called that way by like some mystic from like the 1800s called it that, and it just stuck in it. But the actual Ararat it's called Errata in Sumerian mythology, and it was actually closer to Iran. And so the thing about this is when you look at Göbekli Tepe, you discover that this place was actually 9,500. It was like what 9,500 BC or something like that. It goes way back, and when you look at this, it's very. Oh, and then also Manetho, he talks about records being stored on a pair of pillars of Hermes, not pillars of Hercules, but pillars of Hermes, in a city in Egypt, and they were discovered. They had all kinds of like wisdom or something like this, right? And it was supposed to be there to be stored before the flood. The whole point of it was to store this knowledge there before the flood, so that after the flood, it would all be restored. And Manetho gives a date for when this was. You know when he says it was?
What?
9,300 BC. Which is kind of spooky because it means like there's like an aspect of Egypt that goes way back to it. That's Manetho's. Manetho.
Like Genesis 7:20 goes into how like the waters rose and covered the mountains to a depth more than 15 cubits.
Right. Well, a cubit is a foot and a half, so that would be about 20 feet. So
I mean, it covered Everest by 20 feet.
Which doesn't make sense. That's,
Yeah.
Well, it could be. I have heard that mountains there is referring to something else entirely. It's referring to high hills or like Temple Mounts.
Yeah, like
so,
high hills. That's what I've gotten at too. Like,
exactly.
Well, John Walton's book gets
what's
into
funny
that.
Is actually if you look at it, all of the majority of Genesis, like in the Bible, it interprets the words from mountains as high hills almost all the time.
Right.
But there's multiple reasons why you could take it as high hills instead of mountains.
Yep. So it's interesting then is that you have three separate lines of evidence putting a flood to around 9,500 BC. And when you look at geology, what you find is they had some event called Meltwater Pulse 1b at the end of the last ice age. Well, when you're talking about a global flood, well, what would be the best explanation for that?
Ice Age
meltdown, maybe with a cometary impact, maybe with, there are some, I don't know what I think of these, but there are some like, I don't say out there, they're out there to an extent, but they also have like some serious interest. Like Einstein, believe it or not, was interested in one of these. And Earth crust displacement, for example, they talk about like the idea is that, how like there like the crust is sitting on a big bunch of magma above the mantle.
Right.
Well, what would happen if that were to slip like syrup? The whole thing would just slip across the surface. It wouldn't have, because it would essentially be frictionless, right? Somehow, right?
Right.
If there'd be some kind of, usually the plates are so locked up against each other that wouldn't happen. But what if somehow that dynamic was disrupted and suddenly it had no friction anymore? Or very little friction, and it would suddenly slip a chunk of the plates around, and it would cause,
huge.
That would be a disaster on the surface, And so something like that, either that or a cometary impact, or combined with an ice age meltdown, or triggering an ice age meltdown, could very easily have caused. And they say this happened at 9,500 BC. This Meltwater Pulse 1b, and it rose the sea level by like either 200 or 400 feet. It was something pretty big, though. I forget which one it was, but it was pretty big, and that would have, if there was any coastal cities, they would have all been completely wiped out.
And we wouldn't have any archaeological evidence that they even existed.
Except that we sometimes do, and we all hear the rumors about those things.
Yeah.
Like Yonaguni off Japan, and they had that one thing, which they're not certain, like it was reported as true in the BBC, and then they retracted it, and right now it's ambiguous. IP doesn't like it, but it's like, I looked at it, and it looks like one of those things that it's very likely something there, but it's just not officially confirmed yet, even though it kind of was temporarily confirmed before being disconfirmed. And the Dwarka off the the coast of India, and then they had that one thing off of Bada Bay off Cuba and all that.
Yeah.
So it's like you hear about this stuff, and it'd be kind of interesting. That so my guess is that the flood was essentially the end of the Pleistocene epoch.
Well, I mean, you
And
also
then-
have to remember,
Interestingly, a lot of young Earth creationists would take the same view.
What?
A lot of like young Earth creationists would take the same view.
Well, the problem is the Pleistocene epoch was in.
Right, they would shift. They would shift the dating. But
Right, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah,
well, I mean,
yeah,
well,
probably.
you have to understand this. Like, if the world is billions of years old, then why is it only 2018?
we're really.
That's a pretty, it's a knockdown argument there.
It's like saying the Higgs boson. If God doesn't exist, then why are scientists trying to find his particle, the God particle?
Well, you do know that like a Coca-Cola can was dated back more than 2,000 years, like 2,000 years.
Yeah. So anyway, though, I think that if you date the flood back, I think there's probably some missing, generations there. But if you after the flood, right? But if you go before the flood and you date the flood instead of being, it's not archaeologically tenable to place it, 4,500 years ago, right? But you could place it 11,500 years ago. And if you do that, and then you say the fall was, 1,600 years before that, you have about 1,300 years ago.
Right. 13,000.
I personally believe, I believe in the pre-Adamitic theory, where Adam wasn't the first.
Yeah, it's same here. I think there was humans here before that for like a couple.
It's a big sign that I get from there, because Cain, for example, when he runs
right,
away,
exactly, yep.
Now there are some, explanations for that from a young Earth creationist perspective, but yeah.
They tend to agree that Adam and Eve had more children somehow during the time period, and he ended up going with one of them. But I think that's just ad hoc.
Mm-hmm.
Because we never get any indication of that.
They actually had a quote lost book of Adam and Eve where it says he married his sister, which is kind of Luluwa, I think they call it. But anyway, it is interesting. I kind of wonder the Sumerians probably had something because they talked about Adamu,
Almost all cultures have a story of a first person.
Mm-hmm. But the thing about it is that it has the same name, as it were. It has a lot of the parallel elements that is the serpent in the garden story, but the serpent in the garden this time was a god called Enki. Mm-hmm. It's just kind of interesting like that. But anyway, so you have that, and then you have, I think humans were around. When does standard paleontology place? Is it like 200,000 BC, something like that?
80,000.
Yeah. Something like that. Yeah, I think that's accurate. And what?
That's when Homo sapiens
between 100 to 200,000 years ago is like when the first humans came around.
Yeah, the first Homo sapiens, and then I think the Netherlandians were still around during that time. I don't think they went extinct till like many years after that.
The Neanderthals?
Yeah.
Yeah, same.
I actually did find a funny joke, Atheist did actually make one funny joke. I heard it where they said, say being gay is not they'll say being, sexuality is not a choice. You have no free will.
Mm-hmm.
Like they do, to say, no, being gay isn't a choice. Neither is nothing else. You have no free will.
Oh my.
I mean, determinism, even though I am a determinist, I do admit some people that argue for it are just stupid.
Yeah.
Is that so? Really?
Yeah, I can totally see why people go on them.
Yep.
Hey Tim, without getting into an argument, are you still a young Earth creationist?
I am.
That's impossible to ask.
Are you? I'm just asking.
No.
Wait, you're not?
No.
Wait. Oh, because I was gonna say that you could actually hold the young Earth creationism and idealism. Like you could actually.
I've seen that happen.
Yeah, so you can.
We have there's one guy who has stuff on. Remember my Zeilinger interview way back?
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys know this, but the guy that I got that from, right?
Right.
He is actually a young Earth creationist, and he's posted idealism videos on Vimeo.
Well, I also noticed this is like, well, I mean, how do we know the Earth really isn't 6,000 years old with the appearance of age to it?
Well, that's the thing. You could have like
You can do that with anything, though. You know.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
you could, like, if you were to hold it to a young Earth creationist viewpoint, I mean, sure, you might have to violate some laws of physics, but you could have like a backfire effect, not like a backfire effect, but like a back history effect where like the whole history of the universe was kind of like uploaded, so to speak, 6,000 years ago. And that's why, we have that's why the universe appears to be billions of years old.
Kind of like a video game doesn't start right there.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So,
and you can further have it conditional on the fall and so on.
Mm-hmm.
right.
So here's an example. The discrepancy, imagine the following. The discrepancy between the young Earth creationism account and the evolution account is one gargantuan Mandela effect. Wouldn't that be funny if that was the case?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Christianity is sort of like, the old person mythology where, we're fallen, but we can't get up.
Oh no!
Oh God.
Old
This
person.
is the life alert.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with this. Maybe I shouldn't be. I don't know. Maybe maybe I'm afraid to be. What does this mean here?
You don't get that, I've fallen and I can't get up.
Oh, the whole
The life alert commercials.
Yeah.
Oh,
So we're fallen and we can't get up. That's Christianity.
right.
Well, until Jesus got hung on the cross, then we're
Right.
saved.
Yep.
I do make one little Christian joke. What was Jesus doing on Black Friday?
Oh boy.
Hanging around.
Oh,
Oh boy.
crucify him.
Good grief.
Oh.
Well, I mean, here's another argument that generally young Earth creationists do use. They use the fact that they interpret the genealogies literally. And
Yeah, I know. Well, that's the thing is that the word actually for father means descendant or ancestor rather.
yeah,
So it can mean like a father in like this person fathered this line.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
And furthermore, it's been known that one of those is actually off.
I think. All right. Well, I mean, I think we've gone off discussion a little bit.
slightly.
Yeah.
Like there is actually a point. Like, I forget one of them. One of the generations was shown to be missing
Yeah.
at that. You remember that?
Right.
Yeah.
All right,
well,
well-
here's the thing. We know that there is metaphors in it because, like, one genealogy, it's specifically like the one that tied Jesus to David it's specifically done to tie to David. It spells out in numbers. Like when you spell out the numbers, it comes out to David. It's numerology.
Really?
So
That's
the more you
interesting.
That's
know, and knowledge is power.
Yep.
Well, I mean, whatever. I mean, people.
well,
I mean, the church. I mean, people. I mean, that when it comes to like that issue, creationism. I mean, that's why I typically don't get into arguments like I used to anymore about it. When it comes to creationism and Arminianism versus Calvinism.
Creationism. I mean,
Yeah, but, no, but I'm just saying, like,
These things just never go anywhere, do they?
no,
everyone just stays in their camps and like.
yeah.
They
I mean,
fight.
what I always say is like I say this, like, what is time to a timeless being?
What?
What does like time really matter when we factor in like a timeless God?
I thought you were. Yeah, okay.
Like time is like be irrelevant to God whenever He makes things. Like,
Well,
he's
regardless, I mean, here's the thing: regardless of whether or not Genesis is referring to 6 days or not in a literal sense, time is emergent, so don't have to really worry about any of that.
They all happen on the
So-
same day,
Right.
relativistically.
Exactly. You could say that. I mean, relative to him, it happened in
At the
6
same
days.
time.
Exactly. So, I mean, I don't really see a problem with that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Generally we get into the problem of free, like I know we got on the, I think with evil and stuff we always get into the problem of free will, because Alvin Plantinga, that's one defense he uses, the free will defense,
Right.
So
which is like if God of course could make us without free will, but then that that would seem to go against him being loving, because it wouldn't be really a loving relationship, but more or less forced. Me and Johan, oh yeah, I wanted to ask you this before, but is it Johan or Johan?
Johanan.
All right, good.
Everyone screws it up. Don't worry about it.
All right, but I mean,
Yeah, I kind of tried to nuance it with like Johanan, like so I could sort of say both, just to hedge my bets.
but I mean, I know I see them interchangeably, so I figure if I get it, I mean, I'm bound to get it wrong at least once, but I'll at least get it right once, so it kind of cancels each other out. So like I tend to take the theological point, like I explained it to Johanan about like two different versions of how I go with free will and how that could tie into God's foreknowledge.
I remember that. It's that it's not. He knows it, but it's not. He's not part of the causal chain behind it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like this is like, I have two different analogies for it. Like, the first one is the perfect thermometer analogy, and two is the movie fan analogy. When you're doing in philosophy, analogies are like your best friend. Well, how it works is like, let's all imagine that you have a perfect thermometer. That would entail that the thermometer will always guess the right temperature. Now, just because the thermometer will always be right, does that follow that the temperature is being controlled by the thermometer?
No.
Obviously not, and likewise, just because God will always be right, it doesn't follow that our free will is controlled. In a way, we would decide what God's foreknowledge will be. So in the second analogy I go for is the movie fan analogy, which like Kyle, what's your favorite movie?
Infinity War.
All right, Infinity War. All right, let's just imagine that you just sat in the movie theater and you watched that 50 times. At that point, you would know everything that is going to happen in the movie with a pinpoint accuracy. Every line the person will say and all the actions they will do, you will know it. Would it follow that just because just because you have this knowledge, that Thanos had no free will?
No, but I mean, I guess it would depend on, like, especially when it goes to like Calvinism, whether or not God would be sovereign over his, creatures' decisions.
I'm just saying, like, would it follow that just because you would know, like, since you have watched the movie times, that
just because,
know?
I would agree. Yeah, just because I know doesn't mean I caused them to.
Yeah,
do
because
it, but
on this view,
I mean, on
God's
the
foreknowledge and free will are a non sequitur.
Well, I know, I agree with that. But when it comes to like Calvinism, for example, it comes down to not whether or not God knew what would happen, but whether or not He had sovereignty over what happens.
We have a Calvinist.
Well, he could sovereignly allow free will, could he not?
Probably. I mean, depending on how you define it, because I know most Calvinists are compatibilists. So,
I mean, when I say free will, you can actually have full-blown libertarian free will, and nevertheless,
right,
be,
but
quote unquote, unable to sin,
right,
or unable to do right,
well,
not because. Remember that whole thing we talked about, how the range, the fallen state, the range that we have is limited.
Right. That's why I don't think we have total libertarian free will. I hold to like more of a soft libertarian free will.
Well, no libertarian ever says that we're completely free, right?
Right.
Well, we don't have like maximal autonomy.
I mean, the most.
We don't have maximal autonomy.
Well, no, but the most extreme you can get. No, but the most extreme you can get.
I can't choose to fly.
The open theist, probably. But.
Yeah, well, that's just wrong because their theory of time is wrong. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean
demonstrably so, you know.
Yeah, I know. Like, especially when you get like they all tend to hold to the. That's the biggest problem with the Christianity and like the apologetics now, because since they're all dedicated to the Kalam, and as William Lane Craig presents it, it's completely dedicated on the A theory of time, which goes into Bohemian mechanics
and Lorentzian relativity. And the funny thing about this is they then they actually argue for an absolute frame from God. So they argue from an absolute frame from God to get to Lorentzian relativity, to then set up their Kalam argument, to then argument for God. Do you see a problem here?
It's circular.
It's
circular.
It's literally circular.
Wait, how are there no other people? Are they all? No, here's what bugs me.
Are you sure it's literally a circle or just not metaphorically a circle?
No, it's a circle because you start with, because I've seen William Lane Craig argue for an absolute frame starting from God. Now, he may have some other argument for it, but like it seems like they're question begging God's existence and certain aspects of theology to boot to get to that conclusion in the first place. You know.
Well, he's like a presuppositionalist.
Craig is?
No, he's not.
I don't know. I mean,
if that's the, that would be terrible if you were.
No, he's not a presuppositionalist.
That's
I'm not
good.
Sure. Oh no! Wait, no. I remember. No, I remember. Some people accused him of being a presuppositionalist.
Right, because I mean.
But now hold on here. When they say apologists, I mean, surely there has to be more fluidity in the apologetics camp than the Kalam. Like
there is. There is.
I mean, there is. I mean, there obviously are. But like what I'm saying is, it's not just like a big, huge swath doing this, and only like a few minorities here and there doing the other thing, right?
Right. It's just the William Lane Craig camp is a big camp, but it's not like there's plenty of different camps there.
Right. There's camps everywhere.
Mm-hmm. But how big of a camp is this? Like
it's sizable.
Yeah.
But the thing about it is it's gotten so big. Does it like not monopolize, should I say? But what I'm saying is it like a massive, like, think like a massive corporation with only a handful of other like small things on the side?
Well, yeah, it's kind of like within mainstream apologetics, it's a big camp.
Like, how big are we talking about?
We're in terms, I guess, if we're just talking about in terms of like evidential apologists, like if we exclude like presuppositionalists and if we exclude like Kent Hovind types, most are William Lane Craig fans. So but not all of them are with that. So I would say maybe 60 to 70%.
So we have 60 to 70, approximately 2/3 of a Christian apologists are gone into Baumtard land.
But not
Is that what you're telling me?
Not all of them realize that they have.
Yeah.
The numbers that realize it are pretty low, but they're like super hardcore Molinist.
This is terrible.
Well, hey, you know what? I thought of like someone that you would really love. A Bohemian Mechanics supporter that also is is into Daniel Dennett's philosophy.
Oh boy.
A double zombie.
A double zombie.
Double zombie.
Who is a double zombie is about right.
God.
We have the retardation of the atheist and the retardation of the apologist combined into one.
Wait, here we go. What if they
This has got to be terrible.
Two wrongs do not make a right there either. I'm sure.
Yeah, but two lefts, but three rights make a left.
This whole thing is ridiculous. I cannot believe that there is that many people thinking this way, that they've ended up.
I can believe it. Look
Like,
at the
what
flat
the-
Earth community.
But most of
These are people supposed to be smarter than this. I mean, these are like,
well,
and they
the
assert
one
that
that
they
really
are smart, and that this is they're very dogmatic. If you notice how dogmatic the Bohemians are,
yeah.
it's insane. Like, and they think that we're dogmatic because we're not willing to, like, no, you don't get it, people. We're saying you're dogmatic here because this is considered insane in the physics community. Like, literally, this is not
It's
cool
like
what you guys are doing.
It's like saying, the Earth is flat in a cosmology room.
When it's not
Exactly. I mean, it's not exactly like that, but it's not too
It's
far
close.
off either.
Yeah,
it's
it's
not
not too
nearly
far
as
off.
bad as that, but it's up there.
It's up there. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Mhm.
And they don't realize this, and they're going to try and argue, and then they're going to, like, and they get. I've seen them get smug over this too. Like, one of them got really smug about this. Like, well, that's because they don't know philosophy like I do. Like, these cosmologists. I'm like,
Well, you do know, that we use time always in the past tense. Therefore, the universe is always in the past tense. That's literally one of Craig's arguments for the A theory.
what is his argument?
What is it?
That our language is generally structured to
What?
support the A theory.
What?
So what? That's an argument from intuition.
No, that's not even an argument from intuition. That's like an art. That's so post like
Our flawed intuitions tell us this, therefore it's true.
no, and it's like our flawed language tells us this. That's like saying a dictionary. Like that's
What-
like
what-
it's almost
this is
postmodern. And
It's retarded. Exactly. It's like, who cares what our language says? Our language is wrong. Have you ever consider that?
And he's the
Well,
one that really surprises me with this. Because he's such a critical thinker on most things.
And in this, he's terrible.
He's
Like,
completely blind.
On matters of science, he is merely a layman.
But even in some on things like fine tuning, I mean, he's pretty well read in there. It's not like he doesn't.
well, like I said, he knows his philosophy of religion very well because he's an expert. He is the world-class expert in that area. The problem is when he goes outside of that, he ends up in, well,
When he
crazy
goes
land.
out, yeah, when he goes
Well,
outside his
he is
field.
required to him being a leading philosopher of time. He is required to some degree to know the scientific papers.
Yeah, I mean,
Even
he
though
does.
once again, philosophy.
Right. I know, but some of those papers are from philosophers of science who are not much better off than he. Like, I mean, I don't know if you know this, but what's his name? Tim Maudlin has some issues with B theory as well, and it has to do. Even though he's an atheist, it boils back down to the my intuitions thing,
Right.
I'm like, oh no.
I mean, if you read, for example, the Matter Myth, there's I don't remember what page it was on, but basically the authors made a point that these people that are arguing for Lorentzian relativity, absolute space, like, yeah, there's these scientific papers arguing for these things. The problem is that these scientific papers are themselves written by people that have minimal or no scientific training, which would be people like William Lane Craig, and people that are not actual physicists working.
It's the hack. It's the hacks essentially.
Exactly. It's the hacks. So
It's all
Hey,
hacks.
This is ridiculous. This is just ridiculous.
I know it's. Oh no, it's just ridiculous how
I think it may be a little bit lower than the number I'm thinking here. I think it's a vocal minority.
By vocal, you mean cultish, right?
not both.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say William Lane Craig himself there, but some of the following that you get there.
the motives, basically. because
They're
I mean,
motivated to question big.
exactly. Like you've seen, like I mean, Johanna, you've seen like how they argue for the Bohemian Mechanics. Like it's they have to question big their
Everything.
Yeah, they have to question big exactly. It's ridiculous.
And they're very stubborn about it. They can never admit they're wrong, ever.
Right. And then when
furthermore, then they then pretend that their view is like the mainstream view, you know, like or that it's just normal, like you're crazy for not believing this, and like, no, it's because I mean William Lane Craig is great when it comes, you know, to philosophy, religion, but in the physics area, he's good of a hack.
It's like, you know, it's like Aaron Ra in a way, like.
He's excellent. Aaron Ra is excellent evolution, and when it comes to Jesus mythicism, it's like, oh man,
or anything like or philosophy or like anything else. Like,
yeah,
stick into your area of profession and just stay there.
Yep, it happens. It's
you know, not everything written by I'm trying to how to word it, like just because you are a master of one field does not mean you're a master of all fields.
Yeah.
Some people don't tend to get that. Like if you
now, of course, the problem is people will then say that I'm doing the same thing that, you know, Aaron Ra does with Jesus mythicism and William Lane Craig does with relativity and Bohemian mechanics, right? But the thing about this is number one, I do have an area of, you know, expertise here, but number two is I'm not changing any of the physics.
No, you're just exposing them.
I'm just exposing all I'm doing is saying, if you take the same physics that everyone else is taking and you just take it literally, this is what comes out of it.
Oh, so you're a quantum literalist?
Yeah, that's a quantum literalist. Exactly. I just say, you know, no one ever said, there was no rule that said you had to be an instrumentalist.
What's funny is when I initially heard, like, you know, this is going to sound retarded, but also funny at the same time. When I initially heard an instrumentalist, I thought that was like sort of a band.
The quantum instrumentalists. That's a pretty decent name.
And, you know, and then I realized it was a science term.
It's really, the notion of instrumentalism really is stupid, though, isn't it?
I mean, I haven't really gone into it.
Well, I mean, it literally just means is we're not going to take our science literally.
Right,
why would anyone do that?
What are you doing
what are you doing then? You know, I mean, what's the point of all this?
Well, I mean, it would just be to get predictions, and that's it.
Yeah, but predictions about what though? Like, I mean, so you can use it better. Well, no, is not knowledge. I mean, you can do that with evolution as well, but that's not going to work.
You might be able to answer this for me because, you know, I was wondering if William Lane Craig got this right because, you know, he's been wrong on other scientific topics before.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, does he get it right when he says, like, you know, there is, like, you know, the speed of light is, you know, it's based on the assumption that, you know, between any 2 points, like, there'll be this constant speed of, you know, this constant speed between distances for light. Like, the speed of light will be constant.
Yeah, it should be constant between.
Yeah, so it's made on that, like, Einstein's assumption. You know, that the speed of light is constant in all directions.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I was just wondering because, you know, he's been wrong on science stuff before.
Yeah, it's same in all directions.
You talking about the comparing special relativity to Lorentzian relativity? Or
well, no, I mean, like, you know, in one of his arguments, he says, you know, that, you know, like, science is based on plenty of assumptions. You know, that, you know, you can't scientifically prove. You just have to make an assumption and go with it. And, you know, he was saying, like, the speed of light, for instance, is based on the assumption that, you know, that between 2 points, the speed of light is always constant.
Right, but, I mean, it explains all the data perfectly.
It does, yeah.
You know, that he says, you know, he's just basically saying, you know, science uses assumptions that aren't themselves, you know, science.
Well, yeah, that's why science depends on philosophy. So
yeah,
I mean, yeah, I would agree that.
Was he making a point against like positivism or something?
Yeah,
I think he said that during his debate with Peter Atkins.
Oh yeah.
He was making a point against, you know, scientism, where Peter Atkins said, science is like has all knowledge.
Oh, right. That's
It's stupid.
Yeah.
And and Craig pointed out that science is based on assumptions like
The
that.
problem with this is these people who are positivists, they always question big material. Like, here's an example: Anti-Citizen X. He declares how much he hates philosophy, right? And this one time he goes in this big railing rant about how, of course, quantum mechanics has matter because it's talking about mass, and no, you idiot. You're making a metaphysical assumption, number one. And number two, the whole point is that we're saying is that it's not matter, that what you're calling matter is an illusion. Yes, there is something called matter there, but it's not what you think it is. It's
Well, you could say it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's what instrumentalism is. It just says, oh, there's science, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, they just want to question beg. They call it they pretend metaphysics isn't they pretend materialism isn't a metaphysics, and then they question beg it with getting rid of all their metaphysics.
Right.
And they've been doing, and this is the reason for doing quantum mechanics this way. It's all a shell game. The whole thing is one giant question begging game. And one giant question begging, and then they're going to suspension, literally an indefinite suspension. There has to be some fallacy related to that, like it's a suspension of judgment to avoid the conclusion. That's literally what they're doing, is they're suspending judgment on purpose to avoid the conclusion indefinitely.
It's just ridiculous how this whole stuff comes about. Like, I can't believe, how popular Bohmian mechanics has really gotten over time.
Among whom?
Among laymen, people that don't really have any knowledge of.
Oh,
physics.
it's retarded. It's people that don't want to. They don't want to accept the truth is the problem.
Well, the thing is, like, they want the data to fit their presupposition.
Exactly, and that's what both the atheists who do this do, as well as William Lane Craigites. They want the data to fit their presupposition.
Yeah, which isn't a good thing for any scientific theory. You're
No.
not supposed to base your scientific theory on your
But
presupposition.
it's almost like they've become presuppositionalists in their epistemology to some degree. Not completely, but to some, like the way they this whole warrant nonsense.
Properly basic. That whole
they've properly basic all kinds of garbage in that isn't supposed to be there. Properly basic stuff. What?
The flat Earth is properly basic.
Yeah, because it's our intuition.
Anything is properly basic. That's not how it works.
Right.
Mm-hmm. There is something that is properly basic in a strict sense. Okay, anything on this side of the phenomenon is properly basic. You're talking about something about how the world as it actually is. You can't start talking about that though anymore. So anything about consciousness and epistemology.
Right. Other minds, is properly basic.
Well, in a sense, yes, because
we can't prove it.
Not in the same way. You can't prove it. It's not properly basic in a strict epistemic sense. But
Tim, I think, aren't you referring to reformed epistemology? Wouldn't other minds be properly basic?
A little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Just
and we also can't prove that the world wasn't created 5 minutes ago with the appearance.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's properly basic.
Last Thursdayism.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's some properly, the whole point of properly basic beliefs is to be things like, that we just accept to be true.
Right. Completely foundations.
Yeah. We can't prove them for certain, but we take them anyway.
Yep.
Which there is
in the absence of any defeaters, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we can't prove for absolute certainty that that I'm not just a brain in a vat, being stimulated by a scientist, by some mad scientist into thinking that I'm having this chat with you guys on Google Hangouts.
Right.
Although if that is the case, I'm telling the guy to stop. Prod my brain in an opposite direction.
There was an actual X-Files episode where some guy was a brain in a vat. Actually, no, it was a lone gunman. It was a spin-off of the X-Files, a lone gunman show they had.
Oh.
Remember those 3 computer scientists, geeks?
Jeez.
Computer hackers that Mulder always went to for help? They had like a spin-off show temporarily, and he was they found him and like he was stuck in a.
Well, it's getting late, guys. I don't know how long this hangout's been going on for, but I'm gonna stop the broadcast. We can talk more afterwards, but is it all right if I just end it and the broadcast?
Totally fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
All right. Later, guys.
Well, people are gonna go.